Welcome to Hurrdat Sports Radio.
By Matthew Tkachuk and back to the point Montour. Thrown across, and what a pickoff by Connor Brown. He's got a short-handed breakaway. Brown, backhander, score! Connor Brown gives the Edmonton Oilers a 1-0 lead.
This is a bullet up the middle for Perreault. Ferrer around third, and Florida State strikes first. Honeycutt tees off. Left field again.
Swung on and hammered to right field. This ball is back. This ball is gone off the foul pole. A grand slam for Jay. The fourth career grand slam for Hayward. And the Dodgers are within a run. It's 9-8.
There's a long drive way back in center field. Way back. It is. Just from this draw to a street was a catch which must have been an optical illusion to a lot of people.
The game of baseball has been great to me. Something that I never feel that I would ever quit baseball. But as you know, it always comes a time for someone to get out. And I look at the kids over here, the way they are playing, and the way they are fighting for themselves, tells me one thing. Willie, say goodbye to America. Thank you very much.
Good morning. Welcome in to Hurrdat Sports Radio, AM 590, ESPN Omaha, ESPN Tri-Cities. That's DB. I'm Ravi Lulla here on the Pillar Exterior stage. You can also catch us on Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, all the places. DB, what is up?
Hello, how are things?
You know, we're doing all right.
Shane, that's pretty cool open.
It was a good open.
Going to give the Satan's son his due? Or the devil his due?
Satan
have a son?
Oh, I don't know.
Who would Satan kick it with?
I mean,
like, hey, Persephone, let's come hang out.
I'm guessing there's like some lady demons that are pretty interested.
Yeah.
That'd be my guess. I don't know.
See, I
don't really know.
Just like how I went with Persephone.
No, it's a good one.
Yeah, I just knew that was a name.
The pomegranates and the whole thing.
Yeah, very well.
Yeah.
Very good.
I don't know mythology.
That's a favorite period of mine.
Yeah?
Yeah, I love it.
I'm more of a Roman than a Greek guy, but that's okay.
Surprise, surprise.
Shane, anyway, that's a great open.
You're a big Willie Mays guy, aren't you?
I'm a huge.
That's like your
How
dude.
did you know that?
I thought I remembered you saying it at some point.
That's very good recall on your part because that's been quite some time.
Yeah, that's like your dude, right?
Yep.
Like your all timer. Pretty close.
Pretty close.
Yeah.
And if not, then it's the guy that tried to embody his game.
Griffey.
Yep.
Yeah.
Which is very, very strange for your boy because number one, Mays is an El Gigante.
Yeah.
Which is one of the franchises that I have probably the utmost disdain for.
Yeah, as a Dodgers fan, that's number one on the hit list.
That's Duke. That's Dallas.
Yeah.
San Francisco.
Yeah.
And that's really about it.
I have a weird affinity for the Giants.
Yeah, well, we'll get to that in a second.
Couple reasons. One, I was always a big Barry Bonds guy. Love Barry.
Yeah, you do love some Barry.
So I mean that's obvious connection there. And then Connor Gillespie was a Giant.
Yeah.
So
okay.
I was a big Giants guy.
Yeah. Seaglass?
Yeah.
He's a good dude.
Yeah. And could rake.
Good ambassador too. So it's just weird because I love Griffey.
Yeah.
And number one, he's left-handed.
Griffey was my dude,
left-handed and never played for a team that I cheered for.
Mm-hmm.
But I couldn't always emulate. I was always trying to.
Mm-hmm.
Who can I be like? Which I think is okay. I wish more kids would do that. Just give you a target. But those are my two.
Yeah.
My two faves. And the numbers 24.
Yeah.
And such an ambassador. Right. My dad was a big Willie Mays guy. And so there's a few things that he liked about sports that I took on. And there's a few things that he liked about sports that I went the other way. You know what I mean? So
yeah.
Just kind of depended on how much it was thrown at me.
Mm-hmm.
But Mays was so gracious And I loved his smile, even with kids that I coach, or somebody will say, "Oh man, you got that $1 million smile." Like he just was the great ambassador. I listened to Johnny Bench last night with SVP, and he called him the perfect player for a multitude of reasons, more than just his physical attributes.
Yeah,
kind of just
demeanor, ambassador for the game, the whole thing.
And
he was always around. Even after he retired, he was always around.
How he handled, like, he just has so many iconic moments in terms of him being just a steward of the of the game.
If you love baseball, it's really hard not to love Willie Mays.
Yeah, I'm a big look. There's the man.
Yeah.
You know what's funny? He won. I guess I didn't realize this. He won his MVPs 11 seasons apart.
Mays?
56 and 65.
Yeah, I was just looking at that, actually.
That's 9, right?
It was actually 54 and 64. 54 and 65. Sorry.
Yeah, it's 11.
65.
Yeah.
54, 65.
Isn't that crazy?
Yeah. It's almost
And he had an MVP season after not even playing in 52 and most of 53.
Yeah, because he was in Korea, right?
Yeah.
I always forget that he was so close to integration.
Yeah.
He started his career, right?
Well, his break was in the Negro Leagues in 48.
Right.
Yeah.
At like 17, super young. But, he started in the majors in 51. And I think mentally sometimes we sort of, like, we really separate the 40s and the 50s in baseball because they feel like different games, right? Like Mantle and Mays, those guys feel like they're of a different era than like Jackie Robinson and Satchel Paige and Larry Doby and those guys.
Which is one of the reasons why I think they did the combined records of the Negro Leagues.
Yeah.
Which I was, gosh, I had mixed emotions about that. We never got into it, but I was a little.
So here's the reason
I was a little.
Here's the reason I was okay with it. Because I actually did a lot of research into this because I care about baseball records a lot.
Me too.
I'm a
me too.
big baseball. Like, I know I'm not nearly as into the modern game as I was when I was younger, but there's still a history of baseball that I really, really love. And so I'm reading about this and why they decided to do it. And obviously you've got the segregation issue. That's the huge elephant in the room that, is probably that drove this to a certain extent. Right. But the other thing that brought me around on it, because I was like, man, it's kind of apples to oranges in terms of the actual records. Here's the thing that brought me around on it, though. In 1969, they included a bunch of records and a bunch of players from non-American, non-national league.
It seemed kind of selective.
Yes.
Yeah. I that's very good with your research.
And there was there's no difference between those leagues and the Negro leagues in terms of quality. So, in fact, the Negro Leagues were probably better than a lot of those leagues.
Did it
like the National Federal League and all those?
Did it bug you on the distinction or the duration of the time?
It bugged me that it took so long.
So that's kind of the thing, right? It's like, okay, what made in 69, like, what was the magic? Like, what was the fairy dust?
Yeah, I think they were trying
to. What was the catalyst? You went a couple of steps, but you didn't get them all.
Yeah.
So, I didn't know like how to swallow that. It was like, well, did they do the best that they could? Was it convenient?
It doesn't feel like they necessarily did the best they could.
So I was just.
Here's the only thing that I will maybe give a little bit of grace on.
Does that make sense?
100%. Yeah. I'm guessing it was the late 60s and they weren't like super interested in being real inclusive. That's my guess. I don't know. Yeah. I wasn't there.
Well, I mean, you're right you're on the cusp of the civil
you're
rights
like
movement.
Right in a very contentious time in American history. So that's my assumption. I think it's probably a fair assumption, but I wasn't there, so I'm not going to get real definitive about it. The only thing I'll give some credit for on it taking as long as it did to include the Negro Leagues is because the record keeping, because of the nature of race relations in this country at the time, it took a long time to get complete records of games and box scores and things like that.
Right.
For those games, as opposed to some of the other ones. So this probably is something that, I know they started this process like 20 years ago in order to like compile everything and be able to definitively say, because you remember when we were kids, right? You're like, oh man, Josh Bell had like 800 home runs. Mm-hmm. And you just didn't know, right? Like it was sort of a mythology around some of these players, and they wanted to make the mythology they wanted to make sure it was real. And so I'll give them credit for doing their due diligence and getting that part right and taking a little extra time to do it. But we're talking like late 08s, like to now, as opposed to 1969 to the 08.
Yeah.
So like it was 40 years late regardless. So I was like, okay, yeah, take the extra 10 to make sure you get it right. But yeah, the fact that it wasn't included in 1969 is, I mean, it's a glaring miss.
I'm like, I mean, I could see I think I get the rationale.
Mhm.
I also don't like, and this is just probably more my personality than I'm going to stand on some sort of moral compass.
Mhm.
I just don't like that it gave ammunition or opened up the whole, okay, so if we're doing this, was Jackie Robinson really this, or do we go the other way around for the first white player that was playing in the Negro leagues? Like, if we're combined. So I didn't really like it seemed kind of like
Pandora's
frivolous
box that it was opening up.
Because it defeated the purpose of what they were really trying to accomplish. But anytime you do something big like that, you're going to have unintended consequences. So I just kind of rolled my eyes and I was like,
well, and I think you're going to have people that don't like it that are going to nitpick at it to find reasons. And honestly, I wish it had happened like 10 years earlier, just for the simple fact that pre like all the woke debates.
Gotcha.
Because then you wouldn't have had this discussion about like, oh, Major League Baseball is going woke.
You're probably right.
Like that wasn't 10 years ago. That doesn't happen.
You're probably right.
Yeah, because we don't have that discussion didn't happen 10 years ago.
Right.
Not to the same extent.
Right.
Because
now it's turned into
everything that has to do with any sort of identifying feature about a person turns into a culture war.
Yeah.
And this is a thing that shouldn't. Like, honestly, because even for a second I was like, are they just doing this because like they want to?
No, that's deep. I'm vibing.
I myself was like, are they just trying to be inclusive? Like, what is this? And then that's when I did my research about the other leagues that were included in the 60s, and I was like, oh, okay, no, there's a history of this.
Dude, that's why I'm kind of a big Berean guy, where and not just the church back then, but I mean inquisitive.
Yeah.
Right? Like
because I went from like really unsure about it to like, oh no, this is right.
I want to empower you to be a free thinker, right? Don't just because somebody said. And I even find myself sometimes like you want to fight all these little itty bitty battles, and it's like it just trickles into all sports, and I'm like, and sometimes I think people like think we're dumb or we have like short memories. The whole Caitlin Clark thing, was eating me up. And I know you don't like him, but occasionally, so there's two guys that I follow, that I just glean information from. One I absolutely cannot stand, and it's more about the kind of the person that I think he really is.
Seems to be, yeah.
And versus what he portrays. And the other guy is, we think, vastly different, but there's some things that I admire about him, how he grew his business.
Sure.
One is Clay Travis. One is Jason Whitlock. And Clay Travis this was semifinals of women's basketball of the national championship.
Okay.
He was talking about, he was kind of the first one that I heard talk about it because he said it out loud. He was like, it's going to be an interesting dynamic, a white heterosexual female that could be the face of the league, entering a league where gender and equality and predominantly African-American, it's going to be interesting. And then we started getting these where her name was used. It was kind of weaponized. Race was kind of weaponized to ask her questions about the league. And then he would say, oh, well, ESPN is, they've gone so woke and now they're using, and I'm like, wait a minute. That first seed was sown by you saying it was interesting before she got into the league. Don't just put it out there and then 3 months later, now that everybody's doing it, say, I can't believe they're doing this.
So
those are the things that like
bother you,
that bother me, because I just want like.
So here's why
I'm cool with the dialogue.
Sure.
But let's not act like Well, like, where did this originate, especially with that audience? So when we get
Yeah.
into these sports topics like this,
Mhm.
and you go 10 years ago, that's pretty, I didn't really think about.
Yeah, it was a
All
totally.
I just say to myself is I'm so over it,
Yeah.
which is almost why when we talk sports, unless I believe race to be an actual indicator or a reason for a distinction,
Yeah.
you don't talk about it. And it doesn't mean I don't have my head in the sand. It's just that I don't trust that folks can process information without making it about something that has to do with their confirmation.
Or without seeing it so much through their own lens that they've already got that they're going to miss.
And that's just one thing I don't think I can talk people into or out of.
And again, especially now.
So it's just like,
the one thing I will say, is, and you kind of brought this up with Clay Travis, right? Is the problem with a lot of self-proclaimed free thinkers is they're actually just contrarians, right? Whatever is being talked about, they'll talk about the opposite. And sometimes when you do that, you're going to stumble on something.
I get it.
Sometimes when you do that, you're going to stumble on something that there is like a morsel of truth to, with like the Caitlin Clark thing, where you're like, oh, this is interesting, right? The WNBA is the most openly, LGBTQ league in professional league in the world.
Mm-hmm.
It's not something they hide. There's a lot of out players. You obviously have a predominantly black sport. And then you've got this person who is not a lot of those things, right? And so you have a really interesting dynamic when that person may become the face of a league that doesn't really look like her. Okay, that's a fair point. That's an interesting dynamic. But then, like, the dynamic is still interesting when everybody else is talking about it, or when it starts to get used in a way that is weaponized. Like, the weaponization is not good, but the starting point is still interesting to talk about. That's the problem I have with the people. Like, a lot of people that are just contrarians are like, oh no, I'm a free thinker. It's like, no, sometimes the consensus is right.
Yeah.
And when
I'm with you.
When you arrive back at the place, like, that's what I did with the Negro Leagues thing. Like, the consensus was like, oh, this is a great thing.
Which was where I was going to come back to.
Yeah.
Right? Because you
went and found out.
Because you went and took some time.
Yeah.
Like, I'm open to the discussion.
Yeah.
Right? Because I kind of was like, oh man, I don't want to. I'm kind of torn on this. I just don't think it's apples to apples. And
it's probably not, but other oranges were already invited to the party. That's where I can't
literally rewrite history overnight.
New record holders.
I just was like,
that was my hesitation as well.
I was like, I don't know.
My hesitation was that you've now got new record holders in like lifetime batting average, lifetime OPS. Like, you've got guys that are all-timers in the record books now that weren't even in the record books the day before, right? That was my hesitation, because I do care about these things. But then I looked at it, I go, you're right, it's not apples to apples. But in 1969, they already said, hey, we'll invite oranges to the party. So you got to invite all the oranges to the party.
So the reason I'm nodding when you brought up, I just kind of had I didn't know you were going to take that deep of a dive, but I kind of had a feeling that maybe what you were going to say about the distinction. And so that was kind of my pause. Like, what made that the magic line of demarcation? Because it seemed kind of wishy-washy.
Yeah. There was no good reason to not include the Negro Leagues at the time. They just chose not to, as far as I can understand.
Yeah.
Right?
I mean,
again, I wasn't there, but from what I've read from the records that are available, seems like they just chose not to.
And if you were going kind of in,
why not go all the way?
Yeah.
Also, there's a really good argument to be made that the Negro Leagues were better than all the leagues that were included.
Maybe.
There's an argument to be made for it. It's certainly not worse to the degree that you should exclude it.
Right. Okay.
Yeah. Like, it's at very least equal footing.
You could make the case.
There are more players that ended up playing in
Crossover.
The major leagues, in the national, what we consider the major leagues, the National and the American League, from the Negro Leagues than from any of the other leagues.
Yeah, but we have to kind of also understand, and it's for the sake of being a factoid, you probably weren't going to get much crossover the other way.
No, but I mean not from National League, American League to other leagues. I'm talking about from the other leagues that were included to American National Leagues.
Yeah, because the optics at that time wasn't optics. That's a poor word. The consensus at that time was the major leagues were the creme de la creme. So
yeah, but what I mean from the other leagues that were included in the records, there are more guys that went from Negro leagues to the National American League than from like the Federalist leagues and all these to the American National League, right? Like, those guys didn't make the jump. A lot of the guys from the Negro leagues, as soon as they were allowed to,
made the jump. And I think a lot of it was, at least at the time, that was considered, I mean, maybe not semi-pro, but those leagues were perceived to be inferior.
Yes. Well, and to be fair, I mean, a lot of those leagues were.
I don't know about the perception of the Negro leagues, except for the fact that
Major league players would go play with those guys a lot.
That's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
So I think with the distinction I would make with the Negro leagues is they just didn't have the opportunity.
Yeah, 100%.
Because I don't know if they thought it was like inferior.
No.
But
in terms of baseball, I don't think anybody thought it was inferior.
So
not anybody that knows
that's
what
the difference
about.
between
100%.
the inclusion of other leagues versus the Negro leagues versus.
So if you're going to include the inferior leagues, like what are we doing?
Yeah.
Right.
That's I think that is,
and you can even make the argument.
I think that's an educated discussion.
Well, and even you want to talk about the other leagues, their histories. Some of them are like a couple years. They didn't really have established. I mean, you're talking about stuff from like the early 1900s. Some of these leagues that were included, and you're like, okay, there was no established rules or regulations or anything, and then they used a lot of those rules to keep the Negro leagues out at the time. And it's like, okay, but those things didn't apply to these other leagues that were included. And that's where it became a problem.
And one of the reasons that I was drawn to Willie Mays, other than because it wasn't always good. I mean, my dad was a huge OJ guy too, which is what got me to SC. And now, again, it is what it is.
You got to separate. I mean, you didn't know that.
It is what it is, right? We're real time, and I'm somewhat impressionable, a little more hard-headed, but somewhat impressionable. The thing that I liked about Mays is he was like, and this is like little DB. He seemed like a guy that universally people liked.
Everybody loved that dude.
And I always wanted that, right? So it's like,
oh, that's interesting.
Yeah,
I get it. But that's interesting.
So
because it wasn't the playing style. It was everybody likes that guy.
Yeah. Full disclosure.
Yeah.
For me.
Yeah. No, I get it.
That's what it was like.
I get it.
Right. I didn't have any black neighbors. Right. I'm in West Omaha, even though I'm on 99th and Fort.
Yeah.
Right. We're way out there in West Omaha. Everybody, my family went to my dad had broken all these color barriers. We had been discriminated against. So there's this lack of identity is not the word at that time. Like, it's easy for me to say that at 50 about 8, but that's not what I was thinking then. Then I was thinking, man, like, it's pretty cool. Like, he can go do whatever, whenever. Everybody likes him. He's got these pictures with Mantle, and they're at all these banquets, and he's a spokesperson. And they almost were never talking about sports.
Yeah.
It was always something else. Like it was always something else with Willie Mays. So I just remember being drawn to that because he had this personality.
You wanted to be accepted the way he was.
Yeah. And I just liked the fact that he was like the tie that binds.
Yeah.
So for a guy that, and I've said this before, was too dark for some and not dark enough for others. Like, I was like, you know what?
I could be that guy.
I could be that guy.
Like, I'll do what he does.
Right-handed baseball. Like, there were just lots of things that I liked about him. So I'm a huge Willie Mays guy.
We will get into more Willie Mays throughout the day. I'm sure we've also got a triple header in the College World Series today.
Yeah, we're starting early.
And man, I was watching some hockey last night.
I know. With the text, I said, go, Ravi.
That's DB. I'm Ravi Lulla. We'll be back with more Hurrdat Sports Radio.
We will be back. 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 You're listening to Hurrdat Sports Radio.
It is on into the middle. It's going to be a base hit, and the Mets take the lead by a score of 7-6. That's Willie Mays. Single through the middle.
Welcome back to Hurrdat Sports Radio, AM 590, ESPN Omaha, ESPN Tri-Cities. We're live on Twitter, Facebook, YouTube. That's DB. I'm Ravi Lulla here on the Pillar Exterior stage. It is kind of a testament that we went like 30 minutes talking about Willie Mays and didn't even bring up the fact that he's got maybe the most iconic play in baseball history.
The catch?
Yeah.
Yeah. Although,
it's up there.
Yeah. I wonder what it would be more or less difficult to patrol that huge outfield. If you could run, do you know how advantageous that would be?
Oh, yeah. But you got to be able to run.
Yeah. And now we see that play quite a bit.
Yeah. That's so Willie Mays actually said that probably late 90s.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Early 2000s, maybe, where he said something to the fact of like, oh, yeah, you see, he said, you see a play better than that every week. But it's the first time you saw it. It was now, and part of that's technology, right? But and also World Series.
The
timing, the situation, because it saved runs in the World Series, right?
Yeah, and that was there was a stretch there, and it's weird. Like full disclosure, I kind of pick and choose what bugs me about being right place, right time. See, I don't give Reggie Jackson any credit.
Okay.
for having big Octobers because I've seen it so much since then.
Yeah.
And the other 148 or however many games they were playing at the time, like Reggie was kind of like that, but not really like that. Like there's a lot of guys that aren't in the Hall of Fame
that were better than him
that have Reggie Jackson comps.
Mm-hmm.
So instead of disparaging it, I should probably be closer to, gosh, you know what? Like right place, right time for the whole Mr. October thing.
Sure, yeah.
And it's independent of him being a Dodger killer or anything else. I just look at like historical context. I'm like, this guy isn't even Carlos Beltran.
Yeah.
So
well, and it was. I mean, frankly, it was.
But I don't.
Yeah.
Hold that against Willie Mays.
Sure.
You know, because his defensive prowess at the time was unparalleled.
Yeah,
like
not even close.
That guy patrolling.
He got to everything.
That mammoth space out there was incredible at that time.
Not something that happened back then.
Right.
That was not a skill set most people had.
So I mean, I probably should be a little more diplomatic. But
you like who you like.
I remember.
And it's not even so much my disdain for Reggie, it's the reverence. And I'm like,
it's kind of how I am with guys that I think are overrated. Like I do that all the time where it's like I don't understand the love that some people have for certain people. And I'm like, what do we do? And it almost turns into disdain because I get so frustrated that people don't see a player the way I do in terms of like I think I see them accurately, right?
Yeah, it's like, I mean, George Brett won a batting title in 3 different decades.
Yeah. That's stupid.
That's incredible.
Yeah, it's unbelievable.
And it's like, George Brett. Well, that guy was great.
Yeah, if you went off if you just went
you know what I mean? So I just don't like and I get it, it's sports and it's history, but it's one of the things like that I'll, at least in my head, or even if it like arbitrarily came up, there's just weird things that I will defend and not defend just as a historian of sports where I'm like, man, we pick and choose. And sometimes it's just how sports is, right? It's all about the moment.
It's about the moment, and it's about.
Anybody know Dwight Clark's stats?
Not a clue.
Okay. We know Dwight has the catch though.
100%.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
That's so I shouldn't begrudge that. But man, I just sometimes I want other people to get sometimes I want other people to get their due too.
But nobody talks about Dwight Clark like he's the greatest tight end of all time.
Yeah.
That's the difference, right? Like I know nobody says greatest of all time with Reggie Jackson, right?
That's a good point.
But Reggie Jackson gets extra reverence because of that, because of his postseason accolades, right? But nobody talks about Dwight Clark that way. Nobody talks about I don't know.
I'll give you a guy off my own team that I cheer for.
Who's that?
I think Lynn Swann is overrated.
Oh yeah, yeah. And people do talk about Lynn Swann like that.
So it's like
Lynn Swann gets a lot of reverence.
Yeah,
you know.
And I'm like, I don't even know how much he how much he loved playing, how tough he was.
You know, a guy that it's a different story, but kind of gets the same thing. We were just talking about him the other day. Kurt Warner.
Oh, I didn't turn you on to it, but I said, go look at his stats.
Yeah, they were worse than I thought.
I said,
he had a couple really good years.
I said, go look at his stats.
And
it's surprising how quickly he got into the Hall of Fame.
He's way more Eli Manning than I realized.
Yeah,
in terms of his stats, and if he doesn't have his backstory, probably doesn't get to the Hall of Fame in the amount of time that he did.
Yeah, I spent way too much time going down that rabbit hole.
But I don't disparage him for that. Like,
I don't either.
Cool
man.
Story.
I'm like,
but he gets more reverence because of his story, kind of the same way Reggie Jackson does. It's just a different story. Let's get to Ramon real quick. He wanted to talk about TV.
Racer Ramon.
Ramon, what's up?
Hey, good morning, you guys.
The man with the cool voice. What's up, buddy?
Man, I was gonna call you guys about Fallout. I watched that series, and
with Walter
you guys
Goggins.
Heard about it.
What do you got for me?
Well, so it's based on some video games that came out maybe I want to say over 10 years ago, and I actually played both of them back in the day.
Is it like a first-person shooter or what? Like what is it?
Yeah, it's like but it's more a role-playing game.
Okay,
you're like exploring a world.
Yeah, but it's after a nuclear war happened.
Oh, like Wreck-It Ralph.
Yeah, kind of like that. And it's these people who were living in these vaults that were protecting themselves from the whole fallout. And then what happens when some of them go out and try to explore with it and find out who's been living out there recently.
Oh, so wait a minute. I remember seeing previews for this. This is the people that didn't think anything existed outside the underground thing they were living in?
No, they knew there were things going on, but they just didn't know what, because they were kind of protected during this whole time. But the TV series gets pretty deep into it because they also show what led up to the nuclear war. And it's kind of scary because they were talking about divisions between people and kind of reminds you about some of the things that happen present day, you know? And, but it was really well done, but you didn't have to play the games to enjoy the show. It kind of reminds me of Venom in that way, where you don't feel left out if you didn't play the game or if you don't play games at all.
Is Ella Purnell any good?
Oh yeah, she's
you were about to
kind of card.
You were about to go there, weren't you?
No, I never.
He said, "Oh yeah, oh yeah."
They made it look kind of cartoonish, but in a good way.
Okay.
That's kind of the way my wife and I got together. I told her she looks cartoonish in a good way, and it was happily ever after.
Oh, tight game, Ramon.
Yeah.
Glad I didn't try that one. Wow.
I'd have gotten slapped.
Yeah, you're kind of cartoony. Want to go eat?
But in a good way.
Yeah, she's yelling "Hey" in the background.
Hey. What else you got for me? Anything else good?
Well, that was the main one I was talking about. I just wanted you to know for sure it is not for kids. It is a very adult show. It's very violent, on par with The Boys.
Ooh, you know what? That's one of those shows. Severe tried to get me into that.
That doesn't seem like it'd be up your alley.
And I gave that thing about 3 episodes. Kind of like when you gave me Black Mirror. I'm like, what do you guys want me to watch? I'm depressed. And I watched some, I'm one of those British, detective, track a serial,
anything
I can
to do with the serial killer.
Dude, I can put up with some things, right? Like 2 of my favorite Criminal Minds episodes where pigs were eating people. Like I can put up with some things, but that was just weird.
That's a real thing with the pigs, man.
Oh, I know. Omnivores, they eat anything.
Yeah.
No, I get it. You want to get rid of it?
That's next level. I'm actually thinking. I really like the show, but I'm thinking, Damon, it probably wouldn't be one of your favorites.
But I do like sci-fi. Is it sci-fi? I get the post-apocalyptic thing.
It's sci-fi, but it's gruesome too, and
That's okay.
And it's heavy. It's heavy and gruesome, but really well done.
Man, the heavy thing. Do kids get hurt?
Do kids? Well, yeah. Oh, yeah. They do.
So is
they
it
don't really hold back?
Yeah, is it a lot like?
I might be out. No, man, you can't be wacky.
Is it a lot like Resident Evil?
Kids. Is it like Resident Evil?
It is, but it's actually more. The story is more complex, though.
Okay. My Larry layered and nuanced friend Ramon. I kind of get a vibe. You like depth. This gives us some depth.
Depth and darkness.
Yeah.
That is.
But you guys should also know that it's not finished. It's 1 season right now, 8 episodes. I can't really say how great it'll be overall because they have to finish the show for me to know that. So
okay,
they need another season.
We'll wait on the for the Ramon rating afterwards.
Right.
All right, my man.
All right, Ramon, we appreciate it.
All right, you guys.
We'll be back with more Hurrdat Sports Radio.
We will be back. We will be back. We will be back. We will be back. You're listening to Hurrdat Sports Radio.
Wrapping up hour number one here on Hurrdat Sports Radio, AM 590, ESPN Omaha, ESPN Tri-Cities. We're live on Twitter, Facebook, YouTube. That's DB. I'm Ravi Lulla. Wanted to make sure that I got the lineup out in the first hour here. Not a big deal. Brian Christopherson coming up at 8 o'clock from Husker 24/7. Andy Kendeigh from KETV at 8:30. And then we will talk to Jim Nedrow, the head superintendent at Indian Creek, coming up at 9:30. We've got the Pinnacle Bank Championship coming up here pretty soon. See how preparations of the course are going with Jim.
He has a little Tony Vitello to him.
Does he?
A little bit.
Okay. Well,
especially when he lets the little shadow come in.
Oh, okay. I could see that.
Yeah, not a bad looking dude.
Then we will talk a little NHL with Luke Fox, who covers NHL for Sportsnet.
I'm a little concerned.
Why?
Because I spoke it into existence that they were going to raise the cup.
Yeah, Edmonton's trying to make it a little interesting for you.
Yeah, and I mean, Florida just does some silly things sometimes for a team that's typically pretty disciplined.
Yeah.
All right.
It was entertaining game, though.
Let me ask you. It was.
Yeah.
It's highly. And you liked the 4-on-4, didn't you?
I did. Well, I could tell, I don't obviously know that much about hockey, but I could tell, just the instant it started, just how much more space there is. And I was like, I think I texted you. I go, oh, man, this is going to be this is going to be wild.
Yeah, this is a lot of open.
Because I've played 4-on-4 full court basketball before, and it's ridiculous. There's just so much space. And
Yeah, you guys skate through the neutral zone unimpeded.
Yeah, you can't possibly defend all that space.
Reminded me back in the day when Forsberg called himself being a two-way player, and the guy would just be out here lollygagging in the neutral zone. Like, come on, Forsberg. You remember those days, Shane? Maybe.
That's
Sakic and Foote and Deadmarsh and Kendeigh.
I don't forget those days.
Wow.
And they rented like Bork, and he finally got a cup.
Ray.
Yes, Raymond Bork.
Bruins long time.
I saw something the other day yesterday, and I had been poo-pooing this.
Yeah.
But I know so many Kansas City Royals fans and Chiefs for that matter.
Okay. Pretty common around here.
Okay, but listen though, I never really, this is just dumb DB. Like I never really looked at it from the Chiefs angle because I in my head, I'm like, oh, the Chiefs are the Chiefs, man. Like,
yeah.
They got my homies. Like this dude is God's gift to football,
dude.
right? Yeah, he's the dude. But when the vote passed in the Senate yesterday in Kansas to foot 70% of the bill, then laid out the plan to pay it back over 3 decades, doing my research, because I never thought this was a thing. I'm like,
which part of it?
So I got the whole
Kansas part?
I got yes.
Yeah, okay.
I didn't. I'm like, there's no way. There's just no way. Like they thumb the Missouri side, like
thumbs their
nose up at Kansas.
But
right?
You know what billionaires don't thumb their nose at? Other people footing the bill.
Dude, 70%?
Yeah.
And you're going to pay it back with casino money? So this may really be a thing.
This is a thing.
And I knew that they had to do something different because I've stayed in both hotels. One doesn't even exist anymore. It was the first place that we ever went to the Glacier Clinic, right across the street from the Kaufman and Arrowhead. And I've only been in Arrowhead twice. Once was to get my head beat in an exhibition game. Panthers played the Chiefs in 97. And the other was for the championship game and with college. And so I don't know much about the arena. I do know that people complain about Kaufman. And the biggest, we know tons of Royals fans, but probably the biggest honk, right, would be Happer.
Yeah.
Right? Like,
yeah. Sindelar's a big.
Yeah, but Happer's the kind of dude that would, like, I don't know. He could rationalize Jeremy Affeldt, like, in 2002 on that Royals team being like,
what a reference.
Like being a stopper for the Dodgers in 2024. Like, he's just the irrational confidence fandom thing, right?
That Bruce Chen contract, not as bad as you think.
It's like, hey, man, that was A.J. Hinch before A.J. Hinch, man. Those 0-2 Royals. But anyway,
Mike Sweeney, the most underrated player of his generation.
Hey, man, listen, Gubazar.
Do you remember?
Gubazar was Bueller before you even thought about who Walker was.
You just look up Joe Randa and tell me he's not a dude.
All right. I feel like he doesn't.
This takes me back to the 99 Royals.
I feel like he doesn't have a chance to defend himself. But anyway.
You can call in 888-638-4876.
Dude, is this going to be a problem?
Yeah, it is.
I wonder. Because
here's the thing that we've learned.
Listen, until yesterday, never thought this was going to be a thing.
Here's the thing we've learned about team owners, right? Especially this new era of team owners, right? They will do whatever makes the most financial sense for them. Whether it's moving the Oakland A's to Las Vegas, whether it's threatening constantly to move teams to one place or another to get what you need out of your fan base or out of your state or out of your legislature or whatever. So if you tell,
but even Gretna has like put their expansion plans on hold so they can get like a better handle of it, right? Like this seems like it's moving fast.
It is, but it's because Kansas sees an opportunity. Kansas sees an opportunity to steal things from Missouri.
Wow.
Because, no, listen, you're right, because the Missouri side of Kansas City does poo-poo the Kansas side of Kansas City. Right?
Yeah.
And so if they can take two of the things that mean the most to that side of the river, you don't think they're going to? And you don't think the billionaires that own that team are going to be like, You mean I can get everything I want and I don't even have to change the team name?
70% of the funding?
Yeah. I'm shocked they didn't get more.
That's a lot.
I know. I am stunned they didn't give them more, honestly. Kansas, you know how big of a deal that would be for Kansas to steal those two teams?
Yeah.
That's what I'm surprised they're not footing the whole bill. Because if you're Kansas, it actually sort of makes sense for Kansas.
It makes a ton of sense for
99% of the time. Public funding for stadiums doesn't make any sense.
No, I'm with. I got you. The economics of it.
The economics don't make sense,
especially your constituents have to. Yeah,
especially when it's like originally the Quest Center made sense because Nebraska didn't have anything, or Omaha didn't have anything like that, and it was a multi-use thing, and you didn't have a team billionaire owner that could have footed the bill, right? Instead, for Kansas, it actually does make sense because the economics of having two major sport franchises all of a sudden just plopped in your backyard changes the game for them. Now, it doesn't make a ton of sense for Missouri to pay that bill. They already have those teams, right? There's probably benefits to them to having them in better locations, right? Because that little complex over there sucks. It's terrible.
It is terrible.
And so, there's definitely economic implications for Missouri as well, but not to the same degree of going from 0 teams to all of a sudden you've got the dude in Patrick Mahomes and a pretty good Royals franchise now that's on the way up, at least for the next few years. Now, will they be on the way up by the time
it depends? They got another Nefi Perez?
Are they going to sign the guys that are there now? That's the real question.
Well,
you going to sign Cole Reagans? I know they already signed Bobby Witt,
and it makes sense because you're on the hook for Witt's huge paycheck. You'd love to take that contract over to a new arena or a new facility.
You can open with a superstar, and you already got Mahomes on the other side. Yeah. It makes a ton of sense for Kansas, and it's one of those weird situations where I don't think anybody's screwed up here.
I guess I'm shocked that it's gotten this far. I might need Chiefs. Where's Channel 3 Sean? He's a big Chiefs donk.
Do Chiefs fans not in Kansas City care?
So I think it's more, again, this is the 30,000 foot view. It would appear to be more pushback from the baseball side than football. I'm not sure football cares.
But why would baseball care?
Dude, it's not a lovable loser thing because the franchise is better than a lovable loser tag, but I do feel like there's this unique connection
to Kaufman.
Yeah,
maybe. I think there is an affinity for Kaufman.
Whether it was ability to get like an $8 good seed or
it's not a good
in the outfield. No, listen. I'm 100% aware.
It's not good. Listen, there was an attachment to Rosenblatt too. You know what they needed to do? Build Charles Schwab. That needed to happen.
Hey man, we were doing just fine.
No,
let's not.
We weren't.
Hey,
listen,
you and I were doing just fine. Let's not do the Blatt versus. I'm here for the
better facility.
It's fine. That's fine.
It's nostalgia. That's all we're hanging on to nostalgia.
Hey, don't downplay my emotions.
That's fine.
That's fine.
I'm still on a high from watching something the first time that's ever happened in my lifetime. I'm not going to allow you to rain on my parade.
What's the first thing that's ever happened in your lifetime?
I've never, ever, 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 ever seen the Dodgers come back down 5 in the 9th inning.
Oh,
ever.
In 50 years, I've never seen it.
Yeah, that's a long time.
Probably 4 or 46 because I don't really think I was watching sports.
Not straight out the womb?
Nah.
Not that you remember anyway?
Nah. I'm not even sure I was expected. So, as a matter of fact, I know I wasn't. I don't know what I was doing out the womb.
You know what I found out?
Just happy to be here, apparently.
You know what I found out yesterday is I was talking to my mom because we were like cleaning out their house and stuff. And she apparently used to be a big hockey fan. She would watch hockey growing up. Because she mentioned,
so it's in there somewhere.
She brought up Bobby Orr to me, and I'm like, what? And she's like, yeah, I used to watch hockey all the time. It was on Saturdays, and there was nothing else to do in small town Iowa. And I go,
well, bless her heart. She gets better by the minute.
And I go, because she was talking about him, she goes, yeah, he played for the Blackhawks. I was like, I'm pretty sure he was a Bruin. And she goes, he played for the Blackhawks.
Definitively like that?
Yeah. And then I looked it up, and I was like, oh, last couple of years with the Blackhawks. Okay. It's like, all right, Mama Rose, there we go.
Yeah, get him, Mom.
Coming up next, we got Brian Christopherson, Husker 24/7 here on Hurrdat Sports Radio.
We will be back. We will be back. We will be back. We will be back. You're listening to Hurrdat Sports Radio. Here is Husker 24/7 senior writer, Brian Christopherson.
Yeah, it'll be a little bit of a circus act.
Brian Christopherson.
Well, I mean, that's pretty interesting.
Brian Christopherson.
I kind of enjoy that.
Here is Brian Christopherson.
Kicking off hour number 2 here on Hurrdat Sports Radio, AM 590, ESPN Omaha, ESPN Tri-Cities. We're live on Twitter, Facebook, YouTube. That's DB. I'm Ravi Lulla here on the Pillar Exterior stage, and we are joined now by Brian Christopherson, Husker 24/7. BC, what's going on?
Oh, not too much. How are you guys?
BC, I'm curious. I want to get this out of the way early because I'm a baseball dork. Streak. How do you feel about your team being one of the streakier teams in baseball? Like, it seems like if you win 4 in a row, you're going to somehow get to double digits potentially. But if you're losing, it's like, that was nice while it lasted. I think you're up to what, 6 or 7 in a row again now?
Yeah, I feel good about it right now. I mean, if you asked me this during one of our 8 or 9 game losing streaks, I might
It's
have a different
crazy.
answer for you. But the Twins are 0-7 against the Yankees, so they're done with the Yankees. That's the good part.
Mm-hmm.
They're 0-5 against Schaefer's Cleveland Guardians, and that's a big story in the streak. And then the winning streak, they do really well against teams that suck. I mean, they handle their business, and so good for them on that. The Rays aren't terrible, but they're not having a vintage.
Boy, how about that meltdown yesterday?
Crappy Rays season. Yeah. So I'm feeling good about it right now, Damon. It's a good time to ask me that question. I appreciate it.
Ooh, a little pep in his voice too. Okay.
We got some peppy BC here with the. I saw you tweet out, was it Royce O'Neal the other day, where you're like, "Hey, if this guy stays healthy, you better watch out." Is that just a Twins thing? You always have really good players that can't stay healthy, or what's going on there?
I don't know if I put that out there. Royce Lewis, you're talking
Royce
about?
Lewis. I'm sorry. Who's Royce O'Neal?
Hooper.
Is that the Iowa State guy?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes,
Okay.
Rolls Royce. Rolls Royce is a little different. He's interesting.
Or maybe I just saw it and made me think of you, and I was like, yeah, this could be a Byron Buxton tweet.
Next thing you know, he's going to be saying Pablo Escobar, not Pablo Lopez. It's like, well, where did I get Pablo Escobar from?
Oh, I know who Pablo Escobar is. Burger Sugar King.
That was my fault. I should have just went with it and called him Royce O'Neal too. But
he said Royce O'Neal.
He's the guy that had anxiety about flying, right?
Oh yeah.
Okay. Yeah. All right.
Yeah.
He's good. The playoffs last year, he was the guy who helped them beat the Blue Jays and get out of the first round for the first time. So he's a dude at like 23, 24. He's had like 2 serious injuries, and then the first game of the year, stretching a double into a triple, pulled something and was out 2 months. But he's back. He's playing well, and we're hoping he's through that and not on the Buxton formula.
All right.
I mean, I just gotta ask.
Yeah.
So I don't know if it's because of just coming off serious daddy duties, but Schaefer is pretty overwhelmed with June. It is a heck of a month for you recruiting. Are you feeling the pressure, or are you kind of like, you know what? Kind of getting used to this new change and how these months happen now over the last couple of years?
I'm getting used to it. The challenge for me, I kind of bounce around to a lot of different things. Like, I'll write about the current team and we're analyzing the left guard spot one day, and then I'm popping over and doing some recruiting, and then I'll be, doing a story about, Corey Campbell. And so my only issue is sometimes when I go on the radio, I've got all these wires like crossing over each other. And so sometimes I'm like, if you ask me to name, I've written a bunch of stories about like guys who have received offers and stuff like that. But if you right now like gave me a quiz and said like, okay, name like 5 of them on the spot, it would be a tough duty for me because my wires would be like, okay, I got to move off of Corey Campbell now. And I was thinking about Bryce Benhart just 10 minutes ago. So that's what it's like for me, but that's not a bad thing. It's kind of good in the moment where you're like, okay, now I'm going to go over and have this slice of pie, and now I'll go over there and have that slice. But no question, it's become a month that's like, probably one of the busiest we have when it used to be the most boring. So it's amazing how that switched in about the last 4 or 5 years.
How about the trio of let's just go with Douglas, SJ, and Eli? Those wires don't cross. You can connect those pretty easy, right? Those 3.
Yeah, I didn't hear who you said though.
Douglas, as in
Okay.
Utu, SJ,
Yeah.
and Eli.
Yeah. They continue to recruit that school well, put themselves in the running. There's a lot of elbows out for those guys, like SJ in particular. But you're in the mix, and Donovan Riley just connects really well with those guys. I've come all the way around on him as a recruiter. It doesn't matter like how he is with the media and like how that connects to recruiting. Sometimes we do that where it's like, oh, this guy seems like he's more outgoing up front, so obviously he's got that sort of flair when it comes to connecting with recruits. Donovan Raiola just has that way about like this. He's technique oriented. He's all business. But I think those guys also are able to get inside and have real heart to heart with him. And he shows another side that we don't always see. And he does really well. Like every recruit I ever talk to that comes out of a visit that's a lineman tends to have rave reviews about him. So I'm really impressed with what he continues to do. And that you talk about how things have flipped. He's a storyline that certainly flipped within this Husker fan base.
Apparently, you and me both are in the same camp, and because I watched him work back-to-back weekends, like just up close, right?
Yeah.
I just free to go do whatever, so I kind of just watch him because I think one-on-one he's captivating. I almost never want to leave. Like I love the way he's raised his kiddos. His wife is fantastic. So I'm like, all right, now I'm like all in. I want to see why the magic happens because that room, BC, is, I would say, the way that they do business and their uniformity is like the standard. It's what all the other position groups and position coaches want to be like. I mean that. The other thing is what I text Dom like mid Saturday, and I was like, I can't. It was short. It was something to the effect of, I said, wow, your brother is incredible. I'm just watching him work, and I maybe said another adjective or two. And Dom's response was, he's down at graduation at TCU, and he's like, well, yeah, I've known that. I've been trying to tell people he's a real one. Like, so apparently only me and you are like the ones that were like didn't get the level of, God, this guy is really, really good. Because I mean, there must be a lot more Doms out there that understand Donnie, because he didn't bat an eye at it. He's like, yeah, he is a real one.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, you watch him at camp, he's going to give everything to every guy that's in front of him. And those guys, the thing I notice is they are all in like to everything that he's instructing. And I know he told us in the spring about his knuckles up technique, and I couldn't get all into that stuff and what the difference is between how he teaches something and another guy. But recruits and whoever is in front of him is always curious and really willing to learn from him. So he just does have a way when he gets on that field and when he gets behind those walls with his guys that they believe in him. I always go back to Rule when he was deciding what to do with his staff, and of course Donovan was the one guy they retained. It's amazing. Everybody stood up on the table for him and said, this is the guy, like keep this guy. And that included, if you remember, like a guy or two who was transferring, you know, leaving the program, and they still said that. And that was when I was like, okay, some people need to reassess, understand he had a really challenging year one with the hand he was dealt. Let's see what happens. And ever since then, I think people have gotten a more crystal clear view of sort of what he's all about as a coach and as a recruiter now, which I think is nice to see too for people.
We're talking with Brian Christopherson from Husker 24/7. Staying on Donnie here for a second, BC, is it possible that the things that make him not super engaging necessarily to the media are also the same things that help him connect with his particular position group? Because it's not like most offensive linemen are particularly gregarious the same way that, like, you know, your wide receivers are, for instance.
Yeah, that's a good point. I think there's some truth to that. And I don't want to make it seem like it's bad with the media. The last time in the spring when he was up there, we had a real good session with him. And that's when he sort of talked about his technique and some things like that. So he's definitely said some interesting things too. He has always been a little more quiet in front of the microphone, but that's all right. Some guys are like, I don't got to put this all out there for everybody else. Some of this stuff is from my room, and you know, we'll put out some stuff, but some stuff goes for those guys. And you're right though. In the O-line coaches that I've covered over the years, they would never be usually the spokesperson of the assistant coaches up front. You know, they are kind of that way. Mike Cavanaugh comes to mind. So I understand, though, when you see him up close with a guy, he just connects on that level, like personal, that players really enjoy. And they always talk about it. Some of the guys who are Polynesian recruits connect with him and his background. And so there's a lot of things that have put Nebraska in play with a lot of really good linemen. If you look at who they've recruited since he's been here, he's done a pretty bang-up job, I think.
And how about right on cue, 2027 gets an offer and Matt Erickson, a mountain of a player over at Millard West. He's been big his whole life. He used to go to middle school or elementary school with my youngest. He's a year older. He's always been a big, strong kid. It's interesting to see on this level as we're talking about guys from Bishop Gorman, and the offensive line talk is hot with what Nebraska's been able to do. And it's good to see a local 2027 get an offer, because you get the sense now there's a certain level of trust with their eye in terms of what they're looking for.
Yeah, absolutely. They're not holding back on guys. And they're also, there's really good recruits that they didn't necessarily offer yet, but I know they still have their eye on, like Landon Von Seegern or somebody like that.
Who just picked up another offer from Kansas.
Yeah, he's been doing well. He's got, I think, Iowa State, K-State, and Kansas, as you say.
I think he's got Iowa. I think he's got Iowa.
Oh, yeah, Iowa. You're right.
Yeah.
And that's a guy who, when I watched camp, I thought, he's a good-looking prospect too. But some of those guys who haven't been offered yet, they know that this staff is still watching them and wants to maybe see just a little more film this fall, and we'll see what happens. But you're absolutely right, Damon. They're looking at 26 and 27 a lot, and occasional 28 guy pops into some conversation here and there. But with Matt Erickson, just like you kind of see him in person, you're like, yeah, it's not a matter of if he was going to get offered by Nebraska. It was when. When was last night. Had to be a great moment for the family. As he said in his message, he's been a diehard Husker his whole life. So that one looks like a recruiting situation where Nebraska's probably going to be in good position for that one. But you can understand when you see him up close. Yeah, that's a guy that's probably a D1 player.
BC, not to harp on Raiola this whole time, and that's Donnie, not either Dom or Dylan. Have to be a little more specific here, I suppose, or Dayton for that matter. But a lot of Raiolas floating around Nebraska these days. But Donnie, not to harp on him too much, but you said something that you finally came around on him. I was curious, was there a specific point you remember where you're like, maybe I got it wrong on this guy, or is it kind of just like there had to be a tipping point for you, right? Where you're like, maybe this guy's better than I realized.
I was never down on him as a recruiter. I just didn't know. Like, that was more it from me. I was always in the camp where his first year as a coach here, I understood what Rule and Satterfield were saying. It's like nobody would have done well with the hand he was playing that first year as a coach. So I had no real judgment, and I had a very open mind about him going forward as a coach. It was as a recruit where I was really curious because I didn't know his personality behind doors that well, and hadn't talked to enough recruits who'd been on visits yet where I had a good sense of how he did at that part. He didn't have a ton of college experience, as a coach with that recruiting background. So you kind of wondered how that would play. But then there's that moment where, they're in the hunt for some of these guys like Grant Bricks, and you see them convincing, Rugaroli from Gorman, another Bishop Gorman guy. Just some good recruits in that last class. And I kind of put it all together. I was like, you know what? You look at the names that have stacked up. He's done a really nice job. And even the ones he doesn't get, it's sort of like those guys who transferred out of the program. They still say really good things about him. They still like him. They didn't not pick Nebraska because of Donovan Raiola. So, I just kind of added it up, and I think at some point last year I was like, you know what, he's a pretty good recruiter, and now I'm thinking he might even be a notch above what I thought as a recruiter. So he just kind of went up the escalator with me with how he does with certain guys, and how Nebraska's always kind of in the mix with some of these these big men that are pretty intriguing prospects.
Ravi was trying to get me all fired up and put all this pressure on the running backs yesterday by saying they need to be better. And I'm thinking to myself, offensive line is going to play a huge role in that. They look pretty good. And I went back last night just because, I don't know, I'd rather be right than well-liked. That spring game, Nebraska's handoff run game, it was okay.
Yeah.
Like it was, because I was like, wait a minute, I might have spoke too quick snapping at him like that. But I liked their movement, and I felt like, all right, if they're not going to have quarterback run game and they have to be creative with how they get there or just be good up front if they're in the gun, I felt like they were pretty good at the point of attack in the spring.
Yeah, they weren't bad in the spring game. It sounded like from the reviews we got they did okay. And it wasn't like anyone was just gushing over the top about it, but they were getting some stuff done, and obviously they were going against a pretty good defense. Now, some of the main guys were out of that defense, of course, in the spring game and at times in the scrimmages, but still.
But they used a lot of young linemen too, so that's that was like the great equalizer.
Yeah, you're right. And when you look at the line, it is a group where they should be like eight guys deep, where you feel pretty good about it at this point. And Ben Scott, I think, is someone we should not take for granted. Center, when I think about the years I've covered the team, has always been one of those positions where sometimes a guy would pop up for a year or two and you'd feel good, but then you'd kind of be like, okay, who's next after him, right? Like you kind of couldn't play out the map in your head. And even at that spot now, I think about, well, when Scott's done, you could have Justin Evans could slide in there, Sam Sledge. I think Jake Teeters, who just arrived on campus, is a guy they might want to work at center some. And so you can kind of see at certain positions where it can head, not just with the veterans that are here at certain spots, but who's next in line. And that's good. Tackle, you still got to have some guys, I think, sort of emerge as that your third, fourth, fifth guys who are the future that, stamp their place. But I feel pretty good about the O-line. And I've always said, I thought they took a step last year. And now in my opinion, I'd love to see them take that step. I felt the defensive line sort of did very suddenly last year, where you looked up in the season and you're like, man, I love the depth here. I feel like they can go this way or that way, and they've actually got some more options. And I feel like O-line could be able to prove that this fall. They just got to go out and do it.
BC, I just had a crazy thought here, and maybe it is crazy, maybe it's not. But you mentioned the tackle spot, and that's a spot where they haven't necessarily recruited quite as strongly as they have the interior. But then I think about, okay, what does that maybe look like moving forward? And I realize, okay, they have recruited like 1 million tight ends. And that's something you used to see a lot, is guys with good frames and good athletes that they'd move from tight end to tackle. Do you think that maybe some of the solutions are already on the roster and just not at that spot yet?
An X factor could be Canuck too. We're kind of forgetting about him. I like him.
Yeah, and he did come up a time or two from coaching.
I like him a lot, man.
Yeah, he might be rounding into the mix. Hey, O-line's tough. I always think, because there are guys like Canuck every year where people just sort of forget about them, because they've been like behind the scenes, kind of working their body, figuring out a few things for a year or two. Sometimes it takes 2-3 years, and you're like, oh yeah, that guy. And then suddenly comes in and he's like, okay, he's ready to roll. And that's when you really got it cooking, when you have those type of guys like Canuck, who suddenly one spring you look up and it's like, okay, he could be a part of the rotation at some point. Grant Bricks is a guy who obviously they could develop out there, I think. So they've got some interesting guys. Gunnar Gatula is a pretty versatile O-lineman who I know showed up on the early summer list for getting after it. So that's positive. So there's definitely some names that can be that future. They just need to have those guys have good balls, even if they're not playing games, right? Like getting stuff done behind the scenes with their body and their nutrition and all that. And so next spring, even if they didn't play this year, they're the next in line. They're the next story that pops up where we're like, oh yeah, that guy. So if you can get that wheel turning, you're really rolling as a program.
I want to stay with kind of this interior discussion of O-line, D-line, and think of it like this, BC, relative to how this team's built currently. and two position groups are going to do a standing broad jump. They both need to jump. They both clearly need to jump. Who needs to jump further? Quarterbacks or special teams?
Quarterbacks or special teams? I'm going to say quarterbacks. I think I both need to do it. Don't get me wrong, but if it's one or the other, I just felt quarterback play was so on the average or below last year. I have really respected what Heinrich did as a runner and as a competitor and all that stuff, but to see him even grow in the passing game was really encouraging. But if you can make me a believer, like on 3rd down and 5, 6 yards, you've got the QB now that you can work that intermediate passing game. You can move the chains, and you're not kind of covering one of your eyes like when the play is happening, thinking something bad is going to happen. I just think that's going to be such a step for this program. I think the run game can feed off of that. So that's my answer, but it's an interesting question in the way the two groups you framed it, because I want to see more out of special teams too. Like, I want to see a dynamic returner emerge. I want to see a couple more block kicks. I know Ed Foley talks about you set the tone early in the season where you maybe block a punt in one of those September games and it changes things and opens up your return game. Like, so I want to see something like that in a non-con game where they break through and block a punt or something. All that stuff's going to really add up when you talk about a team that is attached to the slogan "Chasing 3." You can't dismiss any. There is no little part. They all matter. Like every part's got to pull their weight, and special teams certainly has to be that group that has you playing the game with like a 5-yard field position advantage as opposed to a 5-yard disadvantage, which a lot of years Nebraska's played with. It's been as much a problem as the turnover margin stat, honestly, if you look back at it.
That's Brian Christopherson, Husker 24/7 BC. We appreciate the time as always. Good stuff, and we'll talk to you next week.
Thanks, B.
All right, thanks a lot. Thanks, guys.
Want to tell you real quick about our friends over at the Team Jack Foundation. Go to teamjackfoundation.org to find out how you can get involved, whether it's volunteering, donating directly on the website there, checking out their upcoming events, or just learning more about what they do, the projects they're funding, and all the ways they try and help find better treatments for childhood brain cancer and one day a cure. That's teamjackfoundation.org. Coming up next year, we're going to talk to Andy Kendeigh from KETV. He's probably got a busy day ahead of him, I would imagine. All of our local news folks probably out and about as we got a triple header.
Early, too.
Triple header. He's probably out there already. Got a triple header coming up starting at 10 down at the College World Series. That's DB. I'm Ravi. Lulla. We will be back with more Hurrdat Sports Radio.
We will be back. 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 You're listening to Hurrdat Sports Radio.
We are back here halfway through the show on Hurrdat Sports Radio, AM 590, ESPN Omaha, ESPN Tri-Cities. That's DB. I'm Ravi Lulla here on the Pillar Exterior stage. Andy Kendeigh from KETV joins us now. AK, what's going on, man?
Hey, what's happening?
Hi, buddy. So you're back amongst the functional, and how you feeling?
I'm feeling better. Every day is getting a little better. I'm still not back to work yet. That's the frustrating part. But, I've had a unique perspective this week because I've gone to a couple of CWS games as a fan just to get out and walk around. And, the difference between obviously going, you can leave when you want, right? So as opposed to working where you're kind of,
You're like, this one's dragging a little bit. I think I'm going to peace out.
Yeah. This one was pretty enjoyable. Like yesterday, we were at the North Carolina-Florida State game, and I was like, "Yep, this is over after the 2 homers." I'm like, "Yep, this one's done. Let's keep the traffic on. Let's get out of here." So it has actually been a really eye-opening time, because you're not working, but you're still connected and you're still talking to people at work and you're trying to stay as focused as you can be. But man, it has been a weird, tough time to try to get back on your feet. And I'm still a couple weeks away, but prognosis is looking good. And now is just trying to build the strength up.
So I was gonna say, is that the thing? Is not necessarily the stamina, but just like the motor skills and the fitness part.
Yeah, no question, DV. We went to a game. We went to the opener, right, and the North Carolina Virginia game, and we're out in the sun. And Doc says stay out of the sun, so I was underneath the overhang quite a bit, and it was great, wonderful to be out and wonderful to see old friends and stuff. But Saturday, I must have taken a 4-hour nap in the afternoon. I mean, it just exhausts you, and so I got to get back to where I'm up and not needing a 2.5-hour nap in the afternoon, and that's what's the frustrating part. And there's still pain involved too, so the back's still not 100%. So I'm getting there, and I can't tell you how appreciative I am to getting emails from just viewers and people reaching out, people I know, people I don't know. It's been really uplifting. So I really appreciate that, and it's really helped along the journey coming back. It's everybody goes through it where you kind of have moments at work and you kind of bitch and moan. But man, when it's taken away, you're like, man, I really miss being with my KETV family and extended family and the Omaha viewership. And we'll be back. It's just going to take a couple more weeks, it looks like.
Andy, I mean, this is one of those days where I know you'd like to be back at work, but you're probably not sad about having to work a triple header today.
Yeah, one of those rarities, right? One of those rarities. And here's the thing, right? Like, we were chatting last night, and you're like, could you have gotten this game in? Couldn't you? They called it.
They pulled the hook early.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that was the buzz in the crowd was like, wow, they already canceled, postponed the night game, and then you're looking around at 6:15, 6:30. You're like, could they have gotten in? But I understand the frustration that comes along with the start and stop. And that's the last thing these coaches want, is to have to get these guys to have to sit through rain delay after rain delay just to squeeze one in. Now, the other side of things is that if you're Kentucky, Florida, you got to play two.
That middle game could be an eternity.
Exactly, right? With Tennessee and Florida State with their bad.
I'm just saying.
Absolutely. So it could be it's going to be a marathon game and a must-win situation for whoever wins that Kentucky Florida game this afternoon. And then you got Texas A&M just waiting for you. So, I understand the NCAA wants to keep it as on equal competitive ground as possible. But man, hindsight's 20/20. You never know if they could have gotten it in. But when it did rain, it did rain. So I understand them trying to make the right call at the right time. Sometimes it works out perfectly, and sometimes it doesn't. I'm not sure they could have gotten it in last night, and I know that there would have been. It's kind of a can't-win situation, right? Yeah. If you don't call it that early and you try to play, and then you got all these delays, and you got a bunch of people going, come on, coaches and players and fans all complaining. So it
was darker. It was darker at 7 than it was at 8:30. So I get it.
Yeah.
Right.
I mean,
right?
Yeah.
Their best option probably would have been just to start late, right? To start at like an 8:30 or 9.
Because I got why late. The 6-ish would have been
not happening.
Because the thing that I would be afraid of, AK, is I don't want to burn arms.
Yeah.
No question, especially this late in the tournament, DB. We saw yesterday,
don't remind me when a certain right-hander couldn't get one guy out and he got the hook, and I was like, really?
Right? Exactly. My wife turned to me and she said, they're changing pitchers.
Come on, man.
Came in. I'm like, yeah. And that's just it. We were talking to some.
We don't need to dwell on that though.
Okay. I know.
It's okay.
We're talking in our section like these are guys that haven't pitched. Some of the guys that we saw haven't pitched in a month.
Yeah.
Like these are guys that your whole season is riding on, and that's why pitching depth is such the underrated component when you look at the College World Series and what teams are still standing after a week and which ones are already going home, because the deeper pitching staffs are the ones that can carry the load. And you're always going to see these guys that people, even in their own fan bases, saying, who's the hero? Well, those are the guys that come up at the biggest moments and carry a team to the title, and that's what you need this time.
Not everybody's going to be Michael Roth and throw 39,000 innings in about 6 hours. But you got to do me a solid, AK, and put a bug in Caitlin's ear, like, hey, we got this weird part-time coworker during the football season. It is a weather junkie. He was spoiled by Matt Serwe, who he could just text or tweet on demand if we're going to move our football game up to 4 or when's the snow coming. Because she's going to be like, man, why is this little dude bothering me on social media? Just watch the news. Tell her it's different. Like sometimes I got to know by the hour. You know what I mean? It's like I'm pretty high maintenance. So tell her I'm not weird. I come by it honestly.
There's no question about it. I will make sure the bug is placed properly. And
well, sir, Matt did spoil me. I could tweet that guy. It didn't matter, and he would. Hey, we got about 89% chance here at about 110, but you should be good if they move the game up to 4. I'm just like, my man.
Right. And
it's not called spoiling. That's called enabling.
Yeah, my bad.
Yeah.
We got the old semantics police over here.
Serwe's doing a bang-up job in Minneapolis, but he was one of a kind. I'll tell you that much. But it is amazing too about how we've progressed. Right? You can almost come down to the minute when this thing's going to hit and how long it's going to take and that type of thing. And that's why yesterday's early hook was. I get it. I understand people were frustrated, but it's in the other point of view, it gave fans a little bit of another opportunity to at least make their plans and not get stuck in the rain for another day.
Yeah, I mean,
it's going to make for a terrific day of baseball. 3 games of the College World Series, that's not a bad deal, guys.
And let's not kid ourselves. Sometimes I need to know if I can use lump charcoal or I need to actually use briquettes if I only have about 40 minutes. So, I mean,
I know.
Whether I'm going to be outside on the drum or not, I mean, listen, let's not kid ourselves. It's very, very important.
I just remember being out there in the late 90s and there just being tornado warnings out of nowhere. And now we're like, it's going to be gone in 14 minutes. And me and my sister are just in the concourse at Rosenblatt being like, well, I hope we don't die in a baseball stadium today.
Right.
Oh, how times change, AK.
Hey, should be out of here about 5:24.
Right. You guys are shoulder to shoulder and underneath in the concourse at Rosenblatt, just hoping that the thing stays.
Yeah, it's just like was it supposed to storm today? I had no idea. There's sirens going off, and I got to tell you, this is probably too much information. There's never been a stronger smell of urine in one place than the concourse at Rosenblatt when there's 20,000 people jammed in there.
That's incredible. I think I just dry heaved a little. AK, if you're Coach Kingston. Good on you for Zooming yesterday on vacation, or would you have done the media? Were you guys just like clamoring to have him on the Zoom? Because that was an interesting one to have, but I thought he was laid out a nice little plan, though.
Oh, no doubt. I think it was good. I think it was good to get him in front as soon as possible. Could have probably shipped him a logo hat, but other than that, I thought he laid out his plan pretty nicely. It's kind of a nice deal. For him, to have 1 year to get your feet wet. I mean, how many times in professional life do you get that opportunity to send a guy off a veteran in style and not have the pressure to win? Well, of course you have pressure to win, but you get to actually get to acclimate yourself in a year under one of the better guys to learn from and had service. Talk about a guy that would be a great mentor to learn from for your first year and knowing how the do's and don'ts of what to do in that program. So I thought it was an interesting deal. I know a lot of people kind of raise their eyebrows like, how's this going to work? But if it's going to work, these two guys are going to make it work, right? I mean, this is kind of a unique opportunity to really introduce Kingston to the Omaha community. I think it's a great plan, and this guy obviously has an outstanding track record, and I can't wait to see what happens moving forward. And obviously the thing that anybody who's followed Creighton baseball knows, they got to get a facility that is a little bit more intimate for that baseball program to play some games at, and a workout facility and a home base for that program. And I think that's the next step. And can he help bring that to fruition in Omaha. And I think that's the next big hurdle that faces that program, because once they do that, look out. Creighton's going to be there each and every year.
That's Andy Kendeigh from KETV. AK, we appreciate it as always, and keep feeling better, all right?
Thanks, fellas. I appreciate it. And DB, I'll make sure Caitlin gets a message.
Appreciate that, AK. That makes me look a lot more sane.
Yeah, there you go. Thanks, fellas.
Thanks. More Hurrdat Sports Radio coming up next.
We will be back. We will be back. We will be back. You're listening to Hurrdat Sports Radio.
We are wrapping up hour number 2 here on Hurrdat Sports Radio, AM 590, ESPN Omaha, ESPN Tri-Cities. That's DB. I'm Ravi, Lulla on the Pillar Exterior stage. And now is a great time to remind you, as we went a little long there with our guy AK, to make sure you're getting the podcasts, right? Sometimes you get little extras, little tidbits, some deleted scenes.
And we've been sharp, too.
We've been pretty good today. We went a little over.
I meant like in, last week or so.
Yeah, we've done pretty good, but every once in a while you get little extras on the podcast that you don't get over the air. So make sure you go check those out and get those wherever you get your podcast. You were getting mad at people in the stream.
I wasn't like mad. I think it's a tougher question than we're really pondering. And my question was, if both position groups have to jump and you're doing a standing broad jump, who needs to jump further? Quarterbacks or special teams?
It's a fair question.
How do you so it starts? So there's two things you got to ask yourself. This is my amazing Daniel moment, but I would never say amazing Damon. You have to state kind of the context, right?
Sure. You're going to define the parameters of the conversation.
Yeah. So you're watching quarterback play last year, and I think you have to factor in wide receiver play as well.
Yeah.
Drops, not drops, catchable balls, not catchable balls, how your team wants to play, where your team plays, whether the whole nine, and how the team is currently built right now.
Okay.
It appears to be, at least from a little further out view, from the interior out.
Okay.
Right? We don't have near as many questions about O-line. We don't have near as many questions about D-line.
Fair.
Is that safe?
Yep.
Because for even as excited as we are about wide receivers,
I do think that's a good group, especially if you include the tight ends.
they're young.
Young, yeah.
Right? You got some old guys at the top with Banks and Nayor. But even
Nayer's been out for a while.
Is inexperienced.
Yeah. He may not be young, but he hasn't really played in 2 years.
He's inexperienced.
Yeah.
Okay.
You're looking for a big jump from Jalen.
Yep. And let's make up our minds, right? I feel like I have to be the president of Fedoni's fan club because we're kind of meh. But if you're not meh, then you have to acknowledge he's pretty important.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, absolutely.
Bork, the group, if you want to include tight ends, right?
I want to throw Bonner somewhere in there.
Yeah. No, I'm with you. Yeah.
Somewhere.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I'm with you.
But almost every one of those guys that you mentioned needs to make a leap in their production.
Okay. And is that in conjunction with the quarterback play?
I think it has to be, yeah.
Or can we be solid in special teams and win the way that we want to play? If you assume you're going to be playing close games. I think it's a fair question.
It is a fair question.
And it's certainly not as simple as, was that my man Matty that said?
I think so. He said if we have good QB jump, we won't need the kickers and punter as much.
Yeah,
hard disagree.
Yeah, I just don't know. It's certainly not that linear. And again, I just have Iowa in my mind.
Sure.
But it's a couple of different reasons. I've always wanted to be able to win games like that. That's number one. But then I looked at the schedule after you've been on this thing the last 2-3 weeks about them being a double-digit win team. I'm like, how do they get the benefit of, without knowing what's going to happen at the quarterback spot or offensively with a new OC? Although I do think I think the hire was better than critics gave it credit for, especially as a former head coach too. You're comfortable penciling them in for 10.
Yep.
Because they have been elite in 2 other phases.
So there's
why can't we?
There's 2 things there.
Why can't we be elite in a couple of other phases?
Nebraska certainly can be, but
that's where the question came from.
But there's 2 things there with Iowa. Number one, I feel confident penciling that in because they've been doing those 2 things for 20 years. It makes me a little more confident, right? I think that helps.
Oh, the delivery is funny. Okay,
but it's true.
What's next?
The second thing is, if Cade McNamara is healthy, their quarterback play will be better than it was. Like, just full stop. Deacon Hill's terrible. Like, he's.
Where did he land?
I have no idea.
Was it Arizona State?
Horrifying for them if it was. But if they get,
I didn't hate on Deacon Hill like everybody else.
I mean, listen, he wasn't good. Like, I'm sure I don't know if he's a nice person or not. Maybe he is. This isn't an indictment of him as a human being. He was very bad last year. Now, he didn't have a lot of things going for him either. I understand that. But can you imagine if Jeff Sims and Deacon Hill ended up at Arizona State after the year that they both had?
Maybe it wasn't Arizona State. I'm not sure if he has a home yet.
I don't think he landed Power 5, but but my point is, Cade McNamara, in my mind, clear upgrade over Deacon Hill. If Cade McNamara is healthy, like, that's a dude that was good enough to lead a Michigan team that was built not totally dissimilar to how we're talking about Iowa being built to a college football playoff. That's Cade McNamara.
Yeah.
That's an upgrade.
Well, the other thing another reason that prompts the question, is it easier to have good special teams or good quarterback play?
So that's where the question gets interesting, right? Because I would actually argue it's easier to have good quarterback play.
Yeah, I don't know if I'm ever going to agree with you.
I get that quarterback is really, really hard.
Just look at the regard and the lore that it's held in.
I get the lore, but because it's sexy, right? Quarterback play is sexy.
It's also an easy distinguishable factor.
It is. At the very least, I don't know if it's easier. It is good quarterback play is more common than good special teams play. I don't know if it's easier.
You're not being serious.
More common. You know how many teams have bad special teams?
Okay. Are we talking in the college game?
Yes.
You think there are more good quarterbacks than there is quality special teams?
Yeah, I think so.
That might be one of the more ludicrous things I've heard.
I think there is some really terrible special teams throughout college football. There's also some terrible quarterback play. Don't get me wrong. We saw a lot of it last year. But
you can't be serious.
I am 100% serious. There's a reason Iowa stands out as unique.
No.
Yes.
Okay, so the reason Iowa stands out as unique is because they're so good at what they do. It's mind-blowing how they can function
special teams,
at
right?
a high level without having the sexy wideouts or the quarterback play.
They're a total outlier in defense and special teams.
But good special teams play isn't near as much of an outlier as it is being able to win double-digit games with less than stellar quarterback play.
I understand that.
That's your
No, I understand that. I think there is fewer teams that play special teams at or near Iowa's level than there are teams that have good to great quarterback play.
Fresno State made a living with good special teams. We just watched Utah last year play 34 quarterbacks and stay in games with defense and special teams.
That is not super common. There's a reason you remember it.
Okay.
There's you remember Bill Snyder and Bobby Bowden, their secret sauce was we're going to beat you with special teams.
That's kind of a misnomer because you don't have Beasley and Bishop, and they had good quarterback play too.
No,
during.
Bishop is 98. They got good by the time that Bishop got there.
They hadn't won a conference title.
I'm not talking about conference,
then.
but they became competent. They went from the worst team in college football to competent in large part because it's hey, there is a market inefficiency here that if I get really good at special teams, I can beat teams.
Schneider got to K-State in 89, right?
Yeah.
Okay, Chad May was on campus in the early 90s. Wasn't that long. What are we talking about?
We're talking about Chad May.
Not May, not Chad. Was his first name Chad?
I don't remember.
Who's the crybaby that was mad that Christian poked him in the eyes? It was May, right?
I don't remember Chad May. Why? Bishop is where my specific K-State knowledge kicks in.
Dude, you're gonna make me think I'm crazy.
I mean, maybe,
and I know I'm not. It had to be Chad May, right?
I'm just saying this is an area of football where they weren't. I mean, people didn't even offer kickers scholarships until 15 years ago.
Yeah, let's see. That's why I don't listen to you. It is Chad May. The dude was all conference in 94 and 95, 90, 92, 93. He'd been there 4 years and they got good quarterback play.
Okay.
But you just tried to paint this scenario like they were the special teams demons, and that's all of a sudden how they got on the map.
If they hadn't,
that was in addition
if
to.
They hadn't,
it wasn't an aside.
Where did
Rob? It's you can't refute that.
Chad May kind of proves my point, though. Is does anybody remember Chad May?
No, just because you don't. Well, yeah, but he was good.
He was. But again, what did I say? I said there's more good quarterbacks and they're all good special teams.
Point was that's a goalpost shift. That wasn't why
it only feels like a goalpost shift because we're both talking about K-State.
Okay, but the original point was K-State didn't just come to prominence because of special teams.
That's fair.
They were getting good quarterback play as well.
Their special teams though because it's an outlier. The reason we remember their special teams and not Chad May is because Chad May is not an outlier. Their special teams was.
So Fresno State can make a living with good special teams, and it's Fresno State.
Here's the reason you can make livings and things like that is because other people aren't. That's why you can do it in special teams. because not everybody focuses on it the way.
Could I convince you that Nebraska needs to jump further in special teams in 2024?
Maybe we can have that conversation. Might as well next. We got some time. That's DB. I'm Ravi Lulla, more Hurrdat Sports Radio.
We will be back. We will be back. We will be back. We will be back. Welcome to Hurrdat Sports Radio.
Hey, don't forget to get out to unionomaha.com to make sure you get your tickets for a week from tomorrow back here at Werner Park, 7 p.m. Union Omaha takes on Chattanooga. It's Cancer Awareness Night, and it is part of the USL Jägermeister Cup match. Make sure you go to unionomaha.com to get your tickets. That's a week from tomorrow, 7 p.m. at Werner Park. All right, we're back into this conversation here on Hurrdat Sports Radio, Damon Benning and myself, about special teams or quarterback play. And your question was, if both areas need to take a leap, who needs to leap further?
Yeah.
Right? And you're arguing for special teams because
I don't know if I am. What I'm saying
is,
is,
the argument you're currently making is for special teams.
Like, why are we so dismissive of making that? When's the last time you felt like Nebraska had what you would say good special teams?
I can't even remember.
Probably the first year Bo took over.
Maybe, yeah. That's probably fair. It's been a long time. It's been a very long time. You give like Alex Henry, like a kicker goes a long way in making you feel like your special teams are good.
So does a good punt return.
100%.
Right there.
But there hasn't been a good punt returner for a long time. Not a guy consistently you felt good about.
Probably Gross.
You had some, I was going to say DeMornay.
Yeah, Pearsonell.
Yeah.
Yep.
So that's been 12
shame on me.
Ish years, 10.
Yeah, that's Bo, right?
Yeah, that's I think that's in the Bo era. So yeah, we're talking probably early Bo since you've had a special teams unit that you feel good about. Now, obviously, there's a lot more to it than those two guys, but if you have a return game you feel okay about and a kicker you're confident in,
can I? How come I can't sell you guys on the fact that with the special teams rules, it's easier to be more proficient?
It might be easier. It is less common, I think. I genuinely believe that. I know you think I'm crazy. I don't think that many, because everybody
I think it's hard to be a good quarterback. That's what I think.
I do too, but everybody puts such an emphasis on good quarterback play because of how important it is that I think there is an inefficiency in good special teams play. It's something that is often an afterthought. We've seen it here. It's often an afterthought and it's often missed. If nothing in football can be an afterthought and still be good. Unless you've got some freakish special kind of talent somewhere, you're not going to have a lot of things on a football field that you're like, oh yeah, I didn't really get to that the way we wanted to and be successful at it. That's how special teams have felt, not only at Nebraska, but that's how they feel a lot of places. Special teams coordinators are a lot of times not even a real position. A lot of teams don't have a specific special teams guy.
Yeah, and do you remember how long our fan base bellyached over whether to have a full-time special teams coach or not?
All the time.
Okay.
Right?
Yeah.
And I think I agree with you with its importance because it can be a difference maker. It can be, again, I keep using market inefficiency. It can be a place where you can win because other people don't focus there.
So you think if hypothetically, if we took a straw poll, we asked 50 Division I coaches, and the question was, which do you think is easier to become more proficient at? Good quarterback play or special teams?
Their answer is going to be special teams.
But you just disagree with that.
No, I think their actions reflect that because they don't think they have to put the resources into being good at special teams because they think it's easier.
So you rather try to go out and get the game-changing quarterback?
Me personally or the coaches I'm asking?
Just in general. Like, let's start with you.
I mean, everybody wants the game-changing quarterback, right? Everybody. But we also put the resources in to develop and nurture those game-changing quarterbacks.
Do we?
Most people do.
Because of how we recruit them, or
because of
you talk about not reflecting the desired outcome.
Because listen, I'm not saying it's necessarily good systems, but there are systems in place, whether it's 7-on-7, going all the way through high school, whether it's QB camps, whether it's 7-on-7, whether it's passing leagues, all of these things. Then you've got like personalized quarterback coaches and all this other stuff, right? That most of the high-end recruits get these days, or at least have the opportunity to. And then you've got usually a dedicated, you've almost always got a dedicated OC. A lot of times you have a dedicated quarterback coach in addition to that. Quarterback is not a place that's overlooked. I'm not saying everybody does it well, but they put the resources, the time and resources there. I don't think people put the time and resources into special teams because they do think it's easier. And if you think something's easy, a lot of people don't work at it the same. Like school for me was really, really easy for a long time until it got to start where I didn't know just common knowledge. And by that point, it's like, oh, I don't know how to study. Right? If you don't know how to work on special teams, that's probably not an area.
Kyle, you make it, you describe it with your words as though it's like trying to solve pi. It's not astrophysics. It's commitment. That's different than quarterback play.
Yeah, I think they have the commitment to quarterback play, and they don't commit the resources and time to special teams. That's why you can make hay there because other people don't.
So let me ask again.
Yeah.
Which one's easier, in your opinion, to get the desired outcome?
I actually, and this is where we started, and you got mad at me. I think it's...
I didn't get mad.
You enthusiastically disagreed.
Okay, that's fair.
I think it is easier. I think it's harder to get special teams right. I think so. I certainly think it's less common. You could make the argument to me that it's easier, but it's definitely less common.
Man, it is.
How many teams in the let's talk about good special teams play, right? How many teams in the country do you watch that you're like punting, kicking, coverage, and return game? You're like, oh man, those are all 4 on point. How many teams in the country you watch that's the case?
Oh, probably more than I think. I probably watch more games where I was like, gosh, that's pretty good special teams. And I say, man, that's good quarterback play. That's how I would look at it. As opposed to naming them.
That's not, I mean.
Really? So you just get done watching games and you're like, oh man.
I think you can scheme your way. I think teams find really good ways to scheme their way into effective quarterback play.
The special teams rules are so easy now.
Okay. Why don't more people take advantage of them?
Because I think they do, and you're just not acknowledging it.
Okay, that's possible. The college football that I watch, not a lot of super impressive special teams play. I see a lot of pretty good quarterbacks. I don't see a lot of great quarterbacks, but I see a lot of pretty good college quarterbacks.
Do you think Michigan had pretty good special teams?
Yeah.
Yeah. You never at any point liked their quarterback.
That's not true. I was not a hater on McCarthy the way other people were. I didn't understand him going 10, but I thought he was good for what they want. I thought he was very good for them. I made the argument that he was the main difference between them making a playoff and winning a national championship. Like everything else got them to the playoff. I just mentioned.
Do you realize how good Georgia's special teams were with Cantu and those guys when they were with Stetson Bennett at quarterback?
Yeah, you're talking about the very best teams in the country.
No, I'm just giving you I'm just giving you an example of teams that have won at a high level and didn't have what many would consider to be elite quarterback play because they were good in other areas. Iowa's all the way on the other end.
Yeah, they're an extreme.
They're on the other end of that spectrum.
And we've seen, and USC was on the opposite end of that spectrum, right? Incredible quarterback play, pretty much terrible everywhere else. Fair?
Yeah, they couldn't get the place kicking thing right, but their return game was
sure.
Really
Yeah,
strong.
Jed Branch was really, really good.
Was really strong,
right? And that's kind of that elite freak talent thing I was talking about, where maybe you don't have great systems in place for special teams, but if you've got a guy like Branch, you're going to be really, really good there at least on the return game. But when you're talking about the elites or the outliers, whether it's Georgia or Michigan, whether it's Iowa over here, whether it's USC over here, like I'm talking about like the middle 90% of college football. I think there are more.
I think it's even further easier to be good on special teams than it is to have good quarterback play. Especially
easier,
especially in the middle.
I do think it's less common.
Okay. So back to the original question.
Which one does Nebraska need to make the biggest leap in?
Why can't we, if what you just said is true, okay, we'll go with the easier thing.
If you decide to put the resources to it, yeah.
Do you think?
I think Nebraska does. Yeah.
Okay.
I agree.
We just like the fact that Raiola as a prospect seems like it would be easier for him to make the jump than Nebraska special teams.
Here's my argument. I think it's entirely possible that Dylan Raiola as a true freshman, as we see with a lot of true freshmen who start at quarterbacks, is somewhere between average and above average. There's a learning curve, right? That's super common. I can bring up the stats for you. I think it's entirely possible that Dylan Raiola could be between average and above average. And if the special teams takes that leap, Nebraska can still get to the 8 wins that I've been talking about. I think that's totally on the table.
He can be average?
Average to above.
And Nebraska's good at special teams?
Yeah.
Yeah, 100%.
And I think you can get to 8 wins. Now, that being said, that's average quarterback play is a leap for Nebraska. Getting up to average would be a pretty significant improvement in the quarterback play for Nebraska.
So
as well.
Okay. So let me ask it a different way.
Okay.
Given Coach Thomas, Coach Sat, Dylan Raiola's upside, you think that's a further jump than Nebraska's special teams?
Not to average, no. I'm just saying it is. I didn't want it to seem like I was saying average was the status quo from last year.
The question is legit then, right?
I said it was legit the whole time.
Because
I think it's a very legit
that's the
question.
best way that I can word that.
I think it's
given Raiola's talent.
Yeah.
Coach Thomas, Coach Satterfield's new role, just being able to coordinate while he has the tight ends.
Now here's the wild card there.
You think Raiola has to jump, the position group has to jump further than special teams?
No.
Okay.
Here's the wild card though.
Okay.
Is if the
is
if the quarterback, I was first acknowledging that getting to average is significant improvement in the quarterback room. The other thing that we have to acknowledge here is the margin of error that being good at each of those areas gives you. Because, and I think we discussed this off air, Iowa's margin of error in any given season, even when they're very good, is incredibly thin. Because they're usually dealing with average to below average quarterback play and very elite defense and special teams. Fair?
It sounds like you're describing the whole Big Ten Conference as a whole, but sure.
But Iowa's especially. Like that is Iowa's bread and butter. That's how they live. Incredibly thin margin for error for them most days, right?
Against elite talent. They beat almost every peer.
They beat almost every peer, but usually but not by much. It's usually one possession game.
Well,
that's what margin of error is.
Hey, first of all, if you're asking me the question, let me answer, because
Okay.
you're not about to define what it is for me. That is not margin. Margin of error for me when I look at college athletics is how many mistakes can you make and still function at a high level.
Okay.
Can we agree on that?
Sure.
So that's not the primary reason that Iowa plays close games. Iowa plays close games because of their style of play. They don't take a ton of chances because they know that other teams typically beat themselves. Now, if they got vertical in the passing game or put the ball in the air an inordinate amount of times, or the ball was ordinarily in harm's way, like sometimes it boils down to style of play. There's just some teams that naturally play close games. Michigan used to be like that before the talent.
I mean, even last year, the games were closer than people were comfortable with.
Early on, right? You know, it was always 33-0 or 35-7.
They're like, hey, why aren't they blowing teams out more?
Yeah, and I gave the boa constrictor reference,
Sure.
right?
Yeah.
Doesn't mean that they didn't have margin for error. They just didn't play that way. So I don't know if I'm like ready to just roll over and say, oh, that's what margin of error means. No, you're not going to go and play Ohio State and be able to make 3 mistakes, but I've watched Iowa turn the ball over plenty and still win. So let's not act like, oh, if they do this X amount of times, they can't rack up a W. They still do.
Yeah.
So how much was their margin of error last year against Nebraska? They could make a ton of mistakes and still won.
That's
okay.
Nebraska's helping them out a little there.
Okay. Not about to force feed me what margin of error is for them. It's just the way that they play.
Right, but they also play in a way because they play that way because they know they don't have a huge margin for error.
So
that's the argument I would make.
If they had an elite level skill talent outside the numbers,
I think they would take more shots.
Okay.
I don't think they would change drastically their style of play. They'd still be really good defense, really good special teams. They're probably not going tempo still. That's like all those things, right?
I think that further makes the point I'm trying to make.
But they would take more shots.
Their style is their style.
It's still their style.
Because philosophically, they believe in running the ball, stopping the run, taking care of the football, and good special teams. That just lends itself to your narrative.
But let's use Michigan as an example here, right? Because it goes into the next part I was going to say is
we saw this play out real life between the two teams.
100%, right? I think that when you get elite quarterback play, I don't know if you want to call what JJ McCarthy did elite or just very good or whatever.
I like JJ.
I know, but I don't know how you want to quantify his last season. It's somewhere between very good and elite quarterback play. When you get that, you do have more margin for error, I think, than when you are relying on average to below average quarterback play and really good special teams and defense. I think the high-end quarterback play gives you more wiggle room.
Who's a team that you think has really good quarterback play that doesn't have great skill?
That doesn't have great skill?
Yeah.
I'd have to think about that.
It's hard, isn't it?
Yeah.
So typically those things go hand in hand,
So tell me where the skill comes from because we went from defense to special teams to
because
skill.
I think
so fill in that gap for me.
Because when you have good talent outside the numbers and you're getting great quarterback play, your offense philosophically looks different. You typically don't just hand the ball off. Although
like Georgia kind of did. Like they had really good quarterback play and
it's why I like to use. That's why Georgia was my first example. But you shot it down because
I shot it down for special teams.
You shot it down because you said no.
They're
You didn't.
elite.
Even, yeah, you said you just
elite.
said they win championships, and I'm in my head. I'm like, man, I got to just keep finding different ways to ask the same question. So when you have good skill outside the numbers, it leads you to want to take some chances with good quarterback play, right? Let me give you the example the other way.
Okay.
What if Ohio State said, man, I know everybody thinks we have an amazing roster, right? Even though yesterday I was like, you know what? This isn't the best quarterback they've had. This isn't the best.
The roster is really good.
This isn't the best skill group of wide receivers they've had. Now, you may make the case that the secondary this year has got a chance to be better than it has been in the past, but still, it used to be they went through a stretch where they were just cranking out DBs too. But recently, right? So they had to get better on the second level, the linebacking play, and they had to be able to get after the passer. Those are two things that have elevated. Apparently, could be elevated.
Yeah, we expect it to.
What if Ohio State just said, "Hey, we have one of the best defensive lines in the country."
They decided to play like Michigan did last year.
Yeah. And what if they?
They'd probably win a bunch of games.
Okay. So what would you say about that?
In regards to what, their quarterback play?
Yeah. Like, what if they just said, we have two of the best our tandem of running backs is sensational.
Yeah.
How about we just hand the ball off to those guys?
I'm not super sold on Will Howard, so that's.
What if they did, though? What would you think of? Would they be playing it safe?
I think they'd be playing it smart.
Okay.
Smart and safe are sometimes the same thing, but not always.
So you can have.
I think they'd be leaning into the strengths of their team.
Is anything wrong with that?
No, not at all.
So let me bring it back to the first question.
Yeah.
Given the way that Nebraska's built, who do you think needs to make the further jump?
Who do I think needs to, or who do I think will?
Oh, my gosh.
What? That's a different question.
The question that I asked. I didn't ask the second question.
Who do I think needs to?
Yeah. I asked the question that I wanted to know the answer to.
I think the special team needs to make a further jump.
Okay. That's my point, because that's what I believe.
But there's also like part of that. No, I'm just saying part of that is like just making and missing kicks. Like part of that is just like, hey, you got to make more kicks.
Yeah, I get the
right?
I get the tactical versus technical.
Right. Like some of it's just like, hey, you got to execute. Like you put.
But you know what I wouldn't say? Hey, sometimes you just got to catch the rock. Hey man, 3rd and 6, that hits you in your hands. You catch the ball.
No, sometimes you do have to say that though.
Okay.
Right.
So.
Because I mean, you're making.
But that doesn't have anything to do with quarterback play. Because when I asked you the first example about quarterback play, you're like, well, it's almost like I couldn't ask the question independent of wide receivers. But see, that matters too. We put a lot of the onus on quarterback play. But what I asked you off air, how many drops can you envision in your head last year?
There was a decent amount.
Would have helped the quarterback out, right?
Sure.
As poor as we say the quarterback play and all that was,
there were definitely things that could have helped them.
If you simply just catch the ball.
Yeah. Same thing on the defense. As much as we like the defense, there were plays that they could have made.
That's no different than just saying, hey, just make kicks.
I don't know. It's okay. It's different because we're talking about a whole unit versus one position. Like that's where it gets a little bit tricky in those semantics, right?
Unless you didn't like the whole. No, there is no difference. Okay, maybe if you want to talk weather, like wind.
Well, no. So I'm talking about so when you're talking about special teams, you're talking about a bunch of different individual guys. So if you had said, does the offense need to take a further leap or the special teams?
I'm using your example of just make kicks.
Right.
So unless you don't like the hold, like it was a bad snap or hold.
Yeah.
then you are just, it is very similar to just catching the football.
Yeah, like
because you're not depending on anybody. If you're assuming the snap.
But now we're talking about wide receivers, not quarterbacks. Like if the ball's in the right spot, then that's on the wide receiver.
So the reason that I'm bringing up wide receivers is because I want our guys to understand that it's not that Dylan can't handle the pressure, but for Nebraska to be good, he doesn't have to be great. If the special teams is really, really good, he can almost be average.
It lowers the ceiling of where he needs to be.
100%.
Yeah.
And which one of those do you think is easier to accomplish? Whatever your answer is, build it that way. Because I'm not going to get you to agree, but build it that way.
Sure. No, I 100% agree.
So I'm not dumbing down what I think he's capable of doing. I'm saying if you do this the right way, you can allow him to evolve into greatness without having
as a freshman
to grab that savior tag.
As a freshman, you probably want to lean into some of the areas that like defense and special teams.
Yeah, if you fix your special teams, the whole world can open up.
Because then, let's say you're in year 2 with Raiola.
Oh, then it really gets
and
good.
then it can really pop off because
really
you've got your defense is set, your special teams is set, you've got that culture and expectation, and then you've got second year Raiola, and then you've got a situation where things can really start to pop.
100%.
Now, if you sat here and told me that special teams, like, it would not surprise me at all if Dylan Raiola is better than the special teams next year. I don't know how many wins that equates to for Nebraska in that scenario. Like, I don't know that that's going to go the way we want it to, but I can definitely envision a scenario where Raiola is better than the special teams. Is that reasonable?
I would entertain that.
Which I'm not saying that's a good thing, but I do think it's on the table. I would rather it be the other way around where special teams gets fixed and then Raiola comes along.
I just know, I think I don't know if this is the coach. I don't know what this is in me. Maybe it's just me. If that special teams is good, I feel way better than if you tell me Raiola's good. Does that make sense? I don't even know if that's right. Is that right?
I don't.
What's happening?
I probably wouldn't go that far. Unless you can guarantee me Raiola is at least average. I can't leave a floor.
Well, he's not going to be bad.
Well, I'm just saying.
I feel pretty comfortable about that.
I mean, so do I, but all I've seen is a spring game and like a handful of clips.
Is he going to be better than the quarterback play last year?
He better be. There's nothing to indicate he won't be. Right?
You know what's funny?
What?
Is you just chuckled into that response that, man, he will be.
No, I said he better be.
But if I ask you about special teams, which was almost equally as bad at times last year, even though there was like a good 3-game stretch from Tristan or a good 3-game stretch from Boom Sheeny, like
it's because those two guys.
You're like more reluctant because of putting in the resources.
Well, because those two guys are coming back and we got a different guy quarterback. If you're telling me we're running back with Jeff Sims and Heinrich Harburg from last year to this year, I have a different response to that. The personnel change matters a lot here.
That's fair.
Coming up next, we're going to talk to Jim Nedrow. He's the head superintendent at Indian Creek. They'll be hosting the Pinnacle Bank Championship coming up here in August.
We will be back. 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 You're listening to Hurrdat Sports Radio.
We're back here on Hurrdat Sports Radio, AM 590, ESPN Omaha, ESPN Tri-Cities, KFOR in Lincoln. That's DB. I'm Ravi Lulla here on the Pillar Exterior stage. You can also find us live on Twitter, Facebook, and YouTube. Joining us now is Jim Nedrow. He is the head superintendent for Indian Creek Golf Course, which will be hosting the Pinnacle Bank Championship coming up a little bit sooner than we think. Jim, how are you this morning?
I'm doing well, guys. How are you all?
Oh, we're good, man. It's good. It's good to talk to you. You out moving around, or you're at the locale?
I am parked in a field on the side of the road right now. So I'm close, though. I can see the golf course.
Hands free, man. It's listen. I can't multitask either. This job drives me up the wall, man. It's like it's at some point I'm going to get it down.
Jim, as long as I don't, get pulled over here, the cops wonder what I'm doing. We should be good.
That's always a good plan. Let's try and stay in the good graces of.
You could always tell them you're Tony Vitello. Are you rocking any sort of flat bill under there? Because man, he was giving an interview the other day, and he almost never looks at whomever is interviewing him in the dugout. And I was like, oh man, we're going to be talking to his doppelganger here in a couple of days, man. It's like, you're not hiding any Tennessee gear over there, are you?
No Tennessee gear, man. But that guy's intense. He is something, isn't he?
Yeah, and you know what? I think it's the cool thing about leadership, because it works for his guys, because those are the guys that he recruits to that can handle that can handle the fact that he says some crazy things to those guys in the dugout, and it's like, nope, that's just coach,
just Tony V.
Yep. I get it, man. I think I would enjoy playing for a guy like that. I think.
Jim, let's talk about the golf course. We've been having a crazy amount of rain, and compared to last year when we're like, well, do we just let the grass die, or what happens here? What are some of the challenges you've been facing trying to get that thing pro ready as you are dealing with a torrential amount of rain in the spring and early summer here?
Yeah, it's been dry for a few seasons now. So actually it's been kind of nice. It's taken a little bit of extra work off of our plate and let us focus on other things. We aren't out there, guys aren't dragging hoses and hand watering and we're able to put our effort into some other things. So it's been good from that regard. We had that, a few weeks ago, we had that 6, 7, 8, 9-inch rain. That was something. So there was a little bit of cleanup and storm damage repair to deal with that week. But for the most part, we've gotten pretty lucky. Like every time someone around us gets 2 or 3 inches of rain, we get a half or 3/4. So I feel like it's a little bit of karma coming back and helping us out after the last, 2 or 3 seasons of being dry. So it's been kind of nice, man.
You got to have kind of this ideal temperament, because you're going to have some execs and some tour consulting going on with how people want the course to play here in a month and a half or so, but you also have to take care of your day-to-day clientele. Headache, or you're kind of used to it by now, knowing that you're going to have to make some modifications versus, hey, we've got people that like to play every day just as regular golfers?
Well, we've got a bunch of new officials. Our tournament director, our tournament agronomist are all new to the event this year. So that kind of gives us a little bit more leverage because we've done it before.
Yeah, you're the smartest guy in the room.
Yeah, exactly. So that makes it easier. But we don't really shy away from the fact that Indian Creek's going to be difficult. So we do want to cater to the average golfer that plays out here, but we also do tend to lean into being a more difficult layout and a more difficult golf course. So that push and pull isn't quite as extreme as maybe you would think. What are we? What is it? June? 18th, 19th is my anniversary. I should remember that. It is.
Wow.
Yeah.
Hope she's not listening.
So, we're starting to kind of transition into that, right? We're talking about now, it's tournament time now. You don't just flip a switch a week or 2 weeks out. You kind of start to trend into some of that competitive setup now. And so we'll get through this next maybe week to 10 days, and then we'll start to transition. And I don't know that the average golfer will really notice much right away, but as we get into mid-July and towards the end part of July, if weather allows and cooperates, the golf course will really start to trend towards a competitive setup at that point. But we've gotten pretty good at it. I mean, the golfers might disagree, but I feel like we've gotten pretty good at balancing the two.
Jim, so what are some of the biggest differences that an average golfer, let's say, a hack like me, goes out there in 2 weeks, 3 weeks from now? What are some of the biggest differences I'd notice from, let's say, if I'd gone out a month ago and I'm starting to see some changes on the golf course?
Yeah, really the biggest difference will be the rough. We'll start to let the rough grow out a little bit once we get through. Our invitational is the second week of July, and that's kind of what we look at as the kickoff to tournament setup. So we get through that 4th of July weekend, and then we'll start to kind of let everything grow up a little bit. So we'll start mowing at higher heights, and maybe fertilizing a little bit more here or there. Really, it's the rough height. I mean, the firmness and green speeds are something we can manipulate a little bit closer to tournament time. So, you really won't notice that until, the week, 10 days, 14 days out. So rough height, stay in the fairway, man, and you'll be fine.
I was just going to say, it's interesting, especially with so many golfers coming from the Korn Ferry Tour having success once they get their tour card in the PGA. When you're talking about making varying degrees of difficulty, is it with the talent with golfers now, like let's say 2024, is it narrowing of the fairways? Is it pin placement? Like, guys are so long now. What's the first thing you're thinking when you're talking about, okay, we need to kind of tighten this course up for degree of difficulty?
Yeah, so that's like the really hard part, right? I mean, we can only do so much to prepare the golf course for this caliber of play. I mean, if I could do one thing, it would be narrow the fairways. You know, I don't know what Pinehurst's fairway width was, but you know, this particular weekend, but our fairways are, I'm going to guess, you know, twice as wide as most U.S. Open setups. U.S. Open setups are my favorite setups of all the golf tournaments that take place. It's the U.S. Open setups that I like the most. And for us to do anything like that, I mean, our fairways would have to, you know, shrink by half.
It looks like they're hitting it down hallways.
Dude, it is, man. And you don't even realize it, like, until you get out and you can kind of visualize it. You know, you have a 20-yard fairway, man. 20 yards is that's nothing. Nothing. You know, we might have a 50, 60, 70, 80-yard fairway out here. So that's the biggest difference is, and that's why we do focus on rough height. Like, if you miss the fairway, we want to make sure that you feel, you know, some consequence for that. And then around the green banks, course setup, daily setup, tournament setup has a lot to do with it. Pin placement, the distance they play at, you know, and how that corresponds or correlates to the weather on that particular day. The tour setup guys or front nine, back nine setup guys during tournament week can manipulate scores more than I ever thought they could. That's probably been one thing that has been surprising to me is how much thought goes into that setup on a daily basis, and then how much that setup can really manipulate scores. So that's kind of a fun thing to watch.
Jim, how much, if any, feedback do you get from the players, the pros, when they've played the course on kind of the conditions? And I guess how much do you take that into consideration as you prepare for each next year?
Oh, that's a good one. I know you get a lot of feedback.
Yeah, we do. And man, I'll tell you, like, they are no different than a 25 handicap, right? Like, I mean, you have to filter everything, and you have to look at what they shot and take that into account, because it does, and it makes a difference. If someone goes out and plays well, it's the greatest golf course they've ever played. If someone goes out and they catch a bad break here or there, or a bad lie here or there, and it impacts their score, well, then they're going to have gripes. I used to sit in player dining and have breakfast and lunch during tournament week, and I've stopped doing that because no one knew who I was.
And they just be complaining, and you're like, oh, hey, let me tell you what I do.
Yeah, like, and it was complaints about a bunker here or there, or a bad lie. You know, a bad lie in a bunker was like, that's when I said I'm done eating up here. It's like, man, it's a hazard.
Don't hit it there, bud.
Yeah, don't hit it there, right? But overwhelmingly, the responses are very positive, especially at this level. Like, these guys are grinding too, right? They haven't been at the highest level yet, and they haven't been spoiled at the higher level events, the PGA Tour. So a lot of these guys are they're grinding, and they're appreciative to be out there, and they appreciate the effort that we give for this event. I think Indian Creek and the whole team here really is committed to putting on a good show. Pinnacle Bank as well. Like, we take this very serious, and I think the presentation, both from a spectator standpoint and a golf course setup standpoint, is as good, if not better, than anyone else on the tour. And I think these players and these caddies really, really appreciate that. So the feedback's almost overwhelmingly positive from that standpoint.
That's Jim Nedrow, head superintendent at Indian Creek. Jim, we appreciate your time, and I'm sure we'll see you out there for Pinnacle Bank.
You bet. Hey, guys, too, and I know the Hurrdat team is slammed this week, but you guys have the honor of kind of framing this community to a lot of people, and everybody there does a spectacular job. So when you all are sitting there at 1 a.m. after a rain delay, you want to go home and go to bed, like, just know that what you're doing is really appreciative, and you guys are the best at what you do.
Class act, buddy. I appreciate
Thank you, Jim. That's very kind.
You bet, guys. Have a good one.
Thanks.
We'll be back with Luke Fox
Superman.
to talk NHL as we wrap up the show on Hurrdat Sports Radio.
We will be back. We will be back. We will be back. We will be back. You're listening to Hurrdat Sports Radio.
Panthers lose the battle, and Hyman was able to lift it behind Matthew Tkachuk. It's headed for the empty net, and Tkachuk brushed it off the goal line. Rebound, McDavid fires and scores, and there will be a Game 6 of the Stanley Cup Final. McDavid said it, and now he's delivered. Edmonton dragging Florida all the way back to Alberta.
Wrapping up the show here on a Wednesday. Hurrdat Sports Radio, AM 590, ESPN Omaha, ESPN Tri-Cities, KFOR in Lincoln. That's DB. I'm Ravi Lulla, and we are joined now by Luke Fox. He covers the NHL for Sportsnet. Luke, how are you this morning?
I'm doing pretty good. I'm just getting ready to get dragged back to Alberta here.
That's the epitome of a homer call, isn't it? That's like the best.
Another 11-hour travel day. But you know what? I don't mind it because we're seeing some great hockey. And last night I thought was the most intense game of the whole series. And finally we have a series. because you kind of say, all right, well, the Oilers win 1, they go to 5, Panthers have a chance to finish on home ice. But now the fact that we're going to a game 6 and the momentum has shifted here, it's suddenly there's a lot more intrigue.
Yeah. Okay. So I've full disclosure, Florida was my pick. I've told all our listeners, hey, and I got them. This was early, right? This
was before the playoffs started.
Yeah, it was before the playoffs started. And I was getting ready to do a victory lap last Friday. It felt pretty good. And I'm like, hey, glad all you guys took my advice. And I said this morning, I'm like, oh shoot, I may have jinxed that thing. But the more that I look at it, you have to help me figure out what happened to the grimy forechecking, get the puck out of the corner. Like, what happened to the Panthers that I had seen all playoffs now? Or is it more just Edmonton figuring out, okay, we're evolving into this team that doesn't just have to outscore you. We're getting better at it too.
Yeah, I think it's more of the latter. What I would say is I believe in Game 4 in Edmonton, I think there was a little bit of mental difficulty at play. The fact that the Stanley Cup's in the building and the Panthers have a chance for a sweep, which is extremely rare, especially, you're not dealing with an easy team when you're facing one that's won 3 rounds. But all their families flew all the way up to Edmonton. They're trying to arrange tickets. Their families are talking about what it's going to be like on the ice with Stanley Cup there. It's hard to stay focused. And I think the moment maybe got a little bit too big for them, because you're right. That was not the normal Florida Panthers. We're not used to seeing them get routed by an 8-1 score. Now, I do think there's something to it in that Edmonton's figured something out here. This is a franchise that has long been known as offense only. They can't play defense. They can't win low-scoring games. Well, they have figured that out this season. It took a coaching change partway through. It took some new assistant coaches. They have an excellent penalty kill right now. It's fabulous. Everyone talks about their power play and all their firepower up front, but they've been able to prevent goals at an alarming rate. And they just have shown a resiliency through the regular season that is now carrying on to the most important time of year. They were in last place in November. Yeah. And this team has rallied from that. And I think having gone through that in the regular season, they have this crazy belief that even though they fell down 3-0, they can come back. Now, if you're a Florida Panthers fan, I think you should be encouraged by what you saw last night. They fought hard. They can do this. They got 2 at it. And I just think the battle level from both teams is just going to get even higher. A lot of what's determining the series is who's winning the battles along the boards. And the first 3 games, I thought it was Florida. They took it to them physically. And Edmonton has kind of responded because I think there's just a human nature element of desperation. If they lose that game, they're done. So they're kind of laying it all on the line here.
Who's the real Stuart Skinner for you?
Yeah, great question. I think the real one is the one we're seeing now.
Okay.
He's definitely had his dips, particularly in the Vancouver series in round 2. He got sat down for 2 games in favor of journeyman Calvin Pickard. And really that was a slap in the face. He said yesterday morning, he said that, he was, well, he didn't use the word ticked, but he said he was ticked off by that. And I think it made him look in the mirror and say, I need to be a better goalie. I got more to give. So at that was kind of like a turning point in his playoffs. So once he got back in, once he got his net back, he refused to let it go. And, he kind of tiptoed his way into this final series, but the last 2 games, he's been stellar, and he's outplayed the guy at the other end who everyone thought was going to win the Conn Smythe about 4 days ago. And now that narrative is spinning on its head.
We're talking with Luke Fox. He covers the NHL for Sportsnet. Speaking of Bobrovsky, I'm glad you brought him up because I guess I got to ask the same question.
He needs
of
help.
Bobrovsky that DB just did of Skinner. is which version of him do you expect to see for this in Game 6? The guy that was, like you said, likely going to win the Conn Smythe, or the guy that seemingly can't find the puck very well these last 2 games?
Yeah, he doesn't look like himself, does he?
Ever since he misplayed the puck in Game 4.
Yep, you're right. And, they tried to sell it as, hey, we're pulling him out of Game 4. He's going to get some rest because he has, carried a heavy load here. Their backup, Anthony Stolarz, when he went in Game 4, that was his first action in 2 months. And it's really rare, for a goalie to see that much work. It's aware. It's not just aware physically, but it's aware mentally. It's probably the most mentally grinding position in the whole sport, because you let in a goal, no one really, the goalie is the first person they look at. They don't talk about the forward who didn't back check. They don't talk about the defenseman who misplayed it. Usually they look at the goalie. So it's a really, really challenging position. And, he stumbles a little bit. All of a sudden, his save percentage, which before that game was 950 something, is now below 900. And he has been humanized by Connor McDavid and the rest of them. So I would expect a bounce back. He's kind of known for bouncing back, but this is kind of legacy defining stuff. There's a lot of conversation about if Bobrovsky gets a Stanley Cup, he's probably going in the Hall of Fame. And if he doesn't get the Stanley Cup, well, maybe he goes, but it's more up for debate. So, you never know if you're going to get another chance. This is his second chance in a row, getting all the way to the final. He has to shut the door here and get the job done. Or, his legacy might be, hey, he couldn't, he choked in the big games. And that's a scary thought. And so, I think a lot of this right now for Bobrovsky is mental. How does he respond mentally from losing 2 games and, getting lit up a little bit here?
Yeah. So, Luke, I kind of was dismissive, even though I did rub my eyes because they finally scored on the power play in Game 4. But they've had 2 since. Got a couple last night. Is it more about what Edmonton figured out on the power play, or are you believing that they're going to continue to trend upward with their special teams?
Well, it's not just their power play. They also have 2 shorthanded goals, which is a big concern.
Yeah, the first
for the Panthers.
The first was inexcusable.
Yeah. Oh, well, it's just a brutal giveaway, right?
Yeah.
It's a different game because it's also the first goal of the game too,
Yep.
right? So you score first, you start feeling good. Had the Panthers scored first, maybe you're able to plant a seed of doubt and get Edmonton off their game. Usually the team that scores first, it's obvious because you have 1 goal, but it's also you start to be able to dictate the style of play. So that plays into it. But as for Edmonton's power play, it kind of felt like there was only a matter of time because even when they were shut out on the power play in the first 3 games, they looked dangerous. That's their bread and butter. The Edmonton Oilers beat teams with their special teams.
Yep.
That's how they've gotten to round 4. So, the Florida Panthers need to stay out of the box. They can't take so many penalties because this is how Edmonton kills you. And they need to start scoring some power play goals of their own. Florida only has 1 in the whole series. And they were a pretty good power play team in the regular season. And that's been stifled here. So, the more the game is played on special teams, the more it favors Edmonton. Florida is an excellent 5-on-5 team. They got to keep it that way.
Luke, about 20 seconds here. $1 million question. Does Edmonton pull this thing off?
Oh, boy. I originally picked Florida in 7, so I'm going to stick with my original prediction.
All right.
But man, have they made it entertaining. I'm not sure. I believe Edmonton can pull this off. It's only been pulled off once in the history of hockey. In the history of North American team sports, it's only been pulled off once in a championship. But I believe that they believe they can do it.
Maybe that matters even more. Luke, we appreciate the time. Great stuff there.
Thanks, Luke. Safe travels.
All right, take care.
That's Luke Fox from Sportsnet. DB, Ravi, Lulla, we'll be back tomorrow here on Hurrdat Sports Radio.
See you. Have a good day. Love you.